call the meeting to order and have a roll call, please.
Senator Driscoll,
Here.
Senator Grew,
He's online.
Online.
Senator Hicks,
Here.
Senator Kinski,
Be online too. I don't see him.
Senator Rothfuss,
He's here.
Representative Connolly, Representative Gray, Representative Greer, Representative Schwartz,
Here.
Representative Summers,
Here.
Representative Yen,
Here.
Vice Chairman Barlow, Chairman Dockstader.
Here. Folks,
Senator Guru here.
very good. Folks, we're going to jump number 3, go straight into number 4 and start our presentations with joint revenue.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, let's approve the minutes from your January 18th meeting.
All right. Anybody make a motion on that? Second? Minutes adopted. Okay. Now we'll move forward.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, and before we go into the interim committee discussion with the chairman, we've got our annual interim committee bill statistics and also the LSO draft and interim committee staffing statistics.
Like
So,
over those?
As you can see, members of council, in 2021, we backed off the number of interim committee bills slightly from the all-time high of last year's, where there was 171 committee bills numbered for introduction. That broke the old mark by 28 bills from 2007. But we're still pretty darn high with 138 committee bills last year. And those are just bills that were numbered for introduction at the general session, not committee bills that were numbered during the special session in May. So, I guess the point of these two, and maybe we'll just go on to the bill drafting and interim committee meeting stats. So last year we had 690 bill draft requests total. That is fairly high for a general session. I can tell you that a heck of a lot of those bill draft requests came in between January 12th and the start of the actual in-person session in March 1st. And I specifically know that because I looked at my legal division administrator's overtime hours yesterday during that time frame, and he was putting in double time those weeks trying to keep up with the bill reviews. But you can see that the percentage of committee bills we had to the total number of bills was actually down a little bit this year. And our meeting days, while still historically very high, even with Zoom, not as high as they've been over the last decade or so. And we didn't put in staff days this year. I'm finding that number to be less and less relevant, and especially in the age of Zoom. Staff days previously, it also included travel days. And we might have a lot of, staff members now who will be logged on to a Zoom meeting, and they can be logged on and continue to do their work at their desk and might just want to hear. And there's other ones who are actively engaged in the staffing, but it just didn't seem to make sense for the unique interim we had last year to include that stat.
Questions? For the record? Being heard, so let's, there is not anything else, so let's just jump right into the topics and got a full day, folks. Starting with revenue. Mr. Speaker doesn't want to make it full. I'm with him. Yeah. Senator Case, welcome. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that Chairman Harshman is somewhere in Etherland. I think he's going to be joining us. But I don't.
Chairman
see him.
Harshman, if you're out there, come on board.
You know, Mr. Chairman, he will jump on here shortly.
Okay, it's
I think we could go ahead.
all yours, Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, we proposed the interim topics that you have in front of us. You know, some are kind of bold. The first one that we have on the list is Medicaid expansion. Thinking that if you authorize this, we could have this ready for the special session. That's a bit controversial, but I'll just throw it out there first. We decided that'd be our first priority in terms of the special session. The next one, priority number 2, is a statutory requirement that we have not fulfilled. There's a statute says that we are supposed to do this assessment of the distribution of existing revenue streams. It's every 4 years required to be done by the committee. To be honest, we haven't done it. Speaker Harshman or Chairman Harshman has really done his homework and decided we better do something if it's required in statute or get rid of the statute. Priority number 3, review of tax exemptions, kind of an old friend. We've come back and touched on tax exemptions every year, but it's a tireless exercise and we kind of have to do it every year, to be perfectly honest. Thinking of different ways we can approach tax exemptions and just a little bit of tiny background. Not all tax exemptions are bad. They're you know, they have their purposes. Some are economic incentives. Others are relating to the fact that the products that receive the exemption are later taxed down the production. You know, so not all tax exemptions are bad, but we have a lot of them, a bunch of them. And it's been daunting. We've had bills that got rid of all tax exemptions. We've got bills that have gotten rid of a few of them. We're thinking that a different approach might be to stagger sunsets on the exemptions that are more, you know, less inherently taxed down the line and use that as an approach. So deciding groups of exemptions to have sunsets on and then kind of address this over time. That's the proposal there. Energy and public utility taxes relates to how Wyoming differs from other states and the way they assess utility taxes. And it's also a recognition of what our economy is. We have exported energy. That's what we do. We've done it in coal trains. We've done it in electricity over wires. In the future, it's more going to be the electricity over wires. And we need to think about that implication. The idea is to move towards taxing what we sell. And startingly, if you really look into this, you find that the burden of say, an electricity tax on Wyoming consumers could be extremely small. And you could also look to our Constitution, which allows for the deduction of other taxes paid under an income tax scenario. Apply this to a tax, for example, on the gross receipts of electricity, and you'd have the ability to sort of sort things out by the basis of how much taxes are paid. When you look at the fact that, say, in Rocky Mountain Territory, 85% of electricity is exported and only 4% is consumed by Wyoming residential and commercial consumers, you suddenly realize the power of this tax. Now, there is a big bunch of electricity, Mr. Chairman, that's purchased by our industry, our mines, our petroleum producers, our refineries. And it's important that we think about the impact of taxes on those entities. And one way to do that is to go back to that constitutional thing with the income tax, allow the deduction of other taxes paid. So if these industries wish to subscribe to less taxed forms of energy, they'd be able to do so and avoid taxes paid within the state. It's something you could really think about and then talk to the PSC. So we like to continue to explore that. It's a complicated topic. Priority number 5, industrial revenue bonds. We haven't really used this tool in Wyoming. So we dust it off, take a look at it, see if there's anything there. Priority number 6, again, looking at tax structure changes. Look at possibilities of corporate income tax, other forms of income tax. I know that's heresy, but A lot of people say that we shouldn't even begin down the road for an income tax because of our constitutional requirement that all other taxes come off of a corporate income tax. I look at those taxes and I look at that constitutional requirement and I see this as a huge equalizer. This type of tax could potentially impact entities that don't pay other taxes. And they'd be the only ones impacted to any great extent. So I think we need to keep looking at it. Priority number 7, revenue recovery through workforce protection. This relates to a bill I think that came, it's a labor related bill, but it relates to the fact that we give benefits to firms that end up actually hiring out-of-state workers predominantly. And if, you know, it goes back to, I suppose, to our preference and all of those thinking about how we get our benefits to people that actually hire workers in Wyoming. This broadens that a little bit and considers whether exemptions and other benefits could be conditioned upon employing of Wyoming workers. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if there are legal challenges, but we put this on that. Priority number 8, property taxes and taxes on ag land and business personal property. You know, we've had lots of issues about, we now have an exemption on business personal property. We have looked at raising the minimum value for qualification of ag. And we had a bill at one time to take it up to $10,000 from, I think, currently, I think, I can't remember the amount right now, but to raise that amount to try to get at hobby farms and things like that, that really shouldn't qualify for the ag exemption. There's also, it's clear that a lot of committee people are interested in property taxes or caps on property taxes. That was proposed. So this is kind of a general catch-all with respect to property taxes. The rest of the areas are kind of education, possible action items. We come back to local government revenue. You know, we had a bill this year that addressed small part of local government revenue by allowing more time, more dates for them to have their tax election for the optional sales tax that the municipalities can now put on. There's just, we hear over and over that our local government partners need more revenue sources. We're searching, we're looking, we're leaving it on as an educational topic. Senator James has he's done a lot of thinking about the possibility of a tax to kind of rework all our taxes, our mineral taxes and other taxes, and make it into a usage fee. We left it on here so that he would have a chance to present that, maybe line up a couple of things on that. It's very important to him. It sort of fits with the electricity taxes in a way, but we haven't figured out how to integrate it. So here's a topic we'd like to give him some time and see where that goes. The tobacco tax equivalence topic, it's more of a monitoring thing, but as you recall, there's the issue of the assessment of taxes on tribal cigarettes that are sold in the boundary of the Wind River Indian Reservation. Right now, we have an old agreement with respect to that. There's a kind of a specified percentage of tax sales that come back to the state based on an impression that those are the, at one time was the correct proportion, or at least a agreed upon proportion of cigarettes purchased by non-Indians on the Wind River Reservation. We know it's nowhere close to correct. And if you recall, a few years back, we had a bill that would allow for a compact between the state of Wyoming and the tribal entities to allow for tobacco tax equivalents. So we'd all impose the same taxes, but they would, in essence, bill and keep the taxes they impose on sales there, irregardless whether it's a native person or a non-native person that purchases cigarettes. It's a lot cleaner. It gives them a revenue stream. It makes it easier possibly to increase those taxes in the future because we don't have the argument about the arbitrage between tribal and non-tribal. That's it. I hope if Co-Chairman Harshman joined us, I'd love to have him weigh in. I feel like I
Chairman
went
Harshman,
too far ahead.
you hear us?
Oh, I
Chairman?
think, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think that was well said by the good chairman, and maybe there's a couple of those you can combine, but I think, the distribution of existing revenue is, Senator, I mean, that's something that is just missed in our statute. We need to do that. It's been about a 20-year run. It's supposed to happen every 4 years. And so we'll just continue that education piece and keep moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's come back, go to questions. I've got one. You said the industrial revenue bonds, been some time since we've addressed that, using it as business recruitment tool. You actually see you're going to work that into the system. You've got a bold schedule there, sir, but will you work that in as well?
We're a hardworking committee, Mr.
Second.
Chairman. I think we're results driven. We're asking for 4 meetings. We haven't completely figured out the virtual, non-virtual combination, but we are asking for 4 in-person meetings. A lot of revenue is exploring things that probably aren't going to happen immediately, but we have to do the work because we know we need them down the road, sir. And I'll say that. We will work hard.
All right. Committee questions for the co-chairs. Go ahead.
First question on your priority number 1. Why wouldn't that go to Health Committee? Seeing as how it's something historically that the Health Committee has looked at. Why is revenue delving into Medicaid expansion? That's a little bit of a mystery to me. So if you could help me understand why Revenue Committee want to take on a healthcare issue.
Mr. Chairman.
Fine.
Not, Senator Case, I can certainly speak to it, but
He's certainly welcome to. I will say this, and then we can let him add. Revenue sponsored the Medicaid expansion bill a couple of years ago. We have been a supportive committee of the bill. We look at it as a chance to bring revenue to, frankly, our healthcare network in Wyoming, as well as accessing funds to take care of our more than 20,000 people that do not have health insurance in Wyoming. It's not a tax in the sense of that, but it certainly is a revenue generator. Yes, there's an expense side too. We're not trying to shirk from that. But this is a committee that could move that bill forward and give it opportunity for everybody to look at it. And maybe my co-chairman would like to weigh in.
yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Hicks, I think Management Council did assign this to revenue in the 65th legislature. I think it is a revenue issue. Obviously, there's a healthcare piece, but I think particularly with the FMAP on our regular Medicaid, and we're at the lowest. Wyoming is 50-50, and you look at Montana's 70-30 and Idaho's 70-30, and really, when it's about that average household income, we're over the national average, and frankly, because of Teton County. I mean, if Teton County's average household income, I think, is 230,000. Rest of the state's about 52,000. That raises us above that. And I think we've got this opportunity now to move that back to 55-45. I remember when I first came to the legislature, it like my first year, it dropped to 50-50. I didn't even know what it was. That's a significant piece of revenue. And you look at all these states that have 70-30 FMAPs, 60-40, and here's Wyoming at 50-50. And most of our state is below the national average in household income. And so leading up and into this session, that had a lot of conversations. My previous job in the legislature, got to know a lot of these folks. I spoke to the folks in Montana. We heard a lot about Montana, and the word I got was, because I heard it really from non-Montana people. So I called a real Montana guy that's been there forever, and he said, it certainly hasn't bankrupted them. That was what was being said during the session, and that really beneficial to their rural critical care access hospitals. And I think I hear you. I voted against the thing every time, Senator Hicks, and I just But I don't think it's going anywhere. It's not going away. And I think, if there's a way we can kind of meet and do this it looks like probably a net, 30+ million a biennium to the state if we can change the FMAP. And that'll be a huge deal for Wyoming. And I think the bill we had this last session had really two triggers on it, the 90-10 and the 55-45 FMAP. And I think it might be a chance for us to really, because it really is kind of unfair. We have one county that, changes our whole state budget dramatically and on this regard. So anyway, if Management Council wants us to, we certainly have it ready by July, I think, and with those, parameters that the Management Council would like us to pursue. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, any questions on that priority or any of the other 8 priorities? Well,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
just a couple of follow-ups. The idea that because it's a revenue generator, it should go to revenue. If we applied that logic, then we might as well get rid of the Appropriations Committee and the Health Committee that oversees because of all the other federal dollars that come into the Department of Health. So I don't know that's a legitimate concern just to say that this particular piece of federal revenue justifies more consideration for turning over this topic to the Revenue Committee. I guess my big concern is when I looked at this and I went back and did a little research, it come out of the House on a 28-32 vote. So it was 2 votes shy of dying on the House. It appears that there's lack of support for it in the Senate. I think if we do this, it should go to the Health Committee and not Revenue for the reasons I've already stated. But the idea that we're going to what I'm trying to figure out is what's going to be any different about this bill than the one that was introduced in the last legislature if this committee's determined to bring it back for a July special session. I think that's a foregone conclusion. So at this point in time, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to support Medicaid expansion. And if I did, it would go to health, not revenue. I've got a lot of concerns with this.
Okay, thank you. Further comment on this priority? Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm also concerned about this priority. I oppose it. Agree with Senator Hicks. I wanted to ask about priority number 6, this really concerning priority on the corporate income tax and the gross receipts tax. I think state legislatures weighed in on this a lot of times. I think we know where this legislature's at on this. I mean, what is the thought behind this? I mean, I think that's my, what is the committee going to discuss that hasn't already been discussed?
Co-chairs,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
Let him go first.
I'd certainly defer to Senator Hicks. But I think Representative Gray and Mr. Chairman, I'll just real quickly, I'll give you, I think we hear a lot from corporations in our state, and particularly the way we tax the business personal property. And some of the things we do are not probably the most beneficial to really encourage business activity, from purchasing new equipment, those kind of things, to upgrading your equipment. And so that was really kind of the look at that thing. I mean, we already have a gross receipts tax on wind generation, right? We have that already, and we have others. And I think it's just an idea to look at this whole piece of this. And I don't, in my mind, is to kind of the learning part for the whole committee. Probably, it probably wouldn't be a bad thing to get rid of business personal property tax, but then you've got to supplant that 125 million in another way. And I think to spread that around a little bit. And I think our economy's changed, Representative Gray, and my 57 years in the state, it's a lot different. Downtown Casper is way different than it was back in the 60s and 70s. And so as our economy's changed, I think we got to continually study that and look at it. So that's my take on it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Chairman Case, you want to step in for Senator Hicks?
I would, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I think one thing we have to look at is that when we're looking at the entirety of Wyoming's tax structure, and how taxes get paid and where those taxes come from, not everybody has all the oars in the water. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that aren't helping. Certainly when our constitutional provision about an income tax was put in, everybody thought, well, that is a killer. That prevents a tax from being that effective. The truth is, I think that constitutional provision is brilliant. And it actually helps us to sort out the people that have oars in the water and the people that don't have oars in the water and try to retain some of it. There's a large retail establishment in my neck of the woods, it pays two types of taxes. They pay taxes on their property tax, so that's their building and their fixtures. That works out to be something like $150,000 a year. They also pay a sales tax on the stuff that's consumed inside, not the sales tax they collect from their retails, but the sales tax for the stuff that they actually use. If they take something off the shelf, put toilet paper in the bathrooms, they have to pay a sales tax on that. That's a minuscule amount of money. We're talking a huge multi-million-dollar business that contributes very little, yet has impacts, hires a lot of employees that are, not that well paid, not paying a lot of other taxes. That's one of the businesses that probably doesn't have the oars in the water. How do we get at that? We've never had one in Wyoming in the sense that it takes a lot of thinking to figure out how to do it. The Department of Revenue is always scratching their heads about how they would implement one, but we need to figure out more what that would look like. We have to look also at our economy in terms of, Teton County was mentioned earlier. It's not just a Teton County phenomena, but we have very, very wealthy people that are using a lot of services in Wyoming and have property and have other things, but don't pay a lot of taxes. Is that worth looking at? Because they certainly aren't without cost to the state of Wyoming. And even there's even indirect costs in terms of having so much wealth, actually changing the amount of money we get in compensation from the federal government, or yet we still have the same number of poor people. I mean, that's an impact. So it is not a non-starter. It's going to have an increasing importance in Wyoming's future because the things we sell now are in decline. It's as pure as facts as that. And those are the oars that are in the water. We're going to have to find another way. And so we need to keep looking at it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any follow-up? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak to both of the priorities that are being discussed to be taken off of the Revenue Committee list. So first, with Medicaid expansion, I honestly do think that this is the perfect committee and the perfect time in order to take another look at it. The issue before us in terms of the FMAP has never been thoroughly explored by a committee. It's something that became very apparent in the past few months. I think the committee could be the vehicle for moving us forward on the federal level in order to do that work and do it well. But more importantly, it is that we're going to be going into a special session where we'll be talking about federal money and federal money coming into the state and how to best use it. This is the perfect time to take another good look at Medicaid expansion as part of that, as part of it. I think we would be remiss to not do it. And this is the committee that has taken on that task. Labor Health has a full agenda in front of it and hasn't looked at this issue in the same way as revenue. So I would encourage the committee to continue that and actually to keep it as priority one so that it is ready for a perhaps July session.
Thank you. Further discussion, priority one or priority six?
And then priority six, the discussion about corporate income tax and a gross receipts tax, again, it has begun to be vetted, but now we have an obligation to think about school funding in a different kind of way. And as the good Senate chairman talked about, we have a lot of actors out there who honestly have not been paying their fair share, but honestly want the highest quality education for their children and for economic development. I think it is absolutely crucial that we start taking a look at different revenue streams, and in particular, those streams that could potentially support K through 12 education. And I think this is one of them. So, Mr. Chairman, I would encourage the body to continue these priorities. And also just to mention to you that there are hands up. I was told that there were hands up that would like to speak.
Okay, let me double check with my co-chair first. You had, okay. Go ahead. Who had their hand up on the screen? Oh, Guru. Senator Guru, go ahead. And Representative Summers. Oh, the little hands. I got you. Folks on the screen, use your big hands for me. Okay, yeah, right in front of the screen. Thank you. Go ahead, Senator Guru. And then Representative Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. As long as I've got one. So let's talk first about priority one. I think that I think this is the perfect place for this bill. Medicaid expansion is a bill, is an idea I think whose time has come. I disagree with my good friend from Bags on the will of the Senate. I don't think we know that because we didn't take a vote in the Senate on the floor. We took a vote in a committee. So I disagree. I think there is support. And I also think it's a good business bill. I think, and this goes back to 1 and 6 that we're talking about. We have the best tax structure in the country for business. We all know it. But yet businesses don't fly to our door. Why? I think it's a question that we really need to look at. And a lot of it is quality of life. From business owners that I talk to, a lot of it is about quality of life and more of an overall essence of what your state is. And things like Medicaid expansion are part of that. Things like good health care are part of that in general. They see a lack of that. And I think that the good minority floor leader on the House side hit it right on the head when we're going to be talking about this in a special session about how federal dollars and how to leverage them. And so I think that's important. Then on to 6, I'm a CEO of a corporation, and I think we should look at a small corporate tax. It's a tax that I can levy and I can pass on to my customers, but also do some good. I personally feel that as a business owner, I can give more to the state of Wyoming that I get so much of. I do business in 3 states today, and I can tell you I've had a better business relationship with this state in the 40 years that I've been in business, and more and less negative action with the state that I call home, more so than the other 2 states I do business with by a factor of 50. I have more negative interaction with the state just to the north of us in my first 3 months in business than I had in the first 30 years in business in Wyoming. So I think it's important that we have a good business climate, but I also think that a small corporate tax is something that should be looked at. Last point, on number 8, I just wanted to ask one of the big questions that's coming up in the western part of the state is about property taxes on agricultural lands with regard to outfitters. And I would hope that the committee, it looks pretty broad the way that's written, and I would hope that they would entertain some discussions along those lines. It's a question that our outfitters have, and maybe not. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not looking for them to necessarily, and they're not asking for a tax break. What they're looking for is just an understanding of why now all of a sudden their taxes have gone up the way they've gone up and what they can do. Maybe there's some changes, maybe there's some things they can look at. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And, one question I have first for the chair. As I look at this priority number 1, it says this, the committee will have this topic ready for a July special session. So I hope at some point early in this progression that we have a discussion amongst management council, how many topics or what topics are we going to assign to committees for the July special session? Are we going to assign any, and how to, and kind of what does that process look like? So, before we get too deep into things, I would like that discussion. And then on Medicaid expansion, I've never voted for it either until this session, but I think it's worthy to look at. And I think in a special session, we have the ability to expend some federal dollars that perhaps could be, perhaps we could switch, create an endowment that actually pays for Medicaid long-term. So the state's not out anything. So I think there's options we have that would make it much more palatable than probably it has been in the past. In the past, it's not been about philosophy to me. It's been about where are we going to get the money to pay for it? And so I think we might have some unique opportunities there. And then I would just say about, the topic of the corporate income tax. When I look at that in priority number 4, really a wind and solar tax, I've tried 2 sessions on a solar tax, and it's always been said, oh, we can't have a solar tax that looks like a wind tax. Really that should be some other form. So my question is, how do you capture revenue from, for example, a burgeoning new solar industry? If we're not going to do a solar tax like we do a wind tax, then how else do you get it but through some kind of corporate tax? And so I'm not a huge fan of a corporate tax unless it's very constrained in how it's built and who it captures. But I do think they're interrelated, for and the corporate tax.
Non-special session, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple comments. One, when I look at priority number 6, there's also under educational topics, local government revenue streams. And I actually think they're very closely related. And I think it's important as we look at our other revenue streams, which are diminishing, looking at those 2 topics in combination, because I think it could be very effective if we can give local governments opportunities. Maybe we don't have to rely so much on our traditional revenue streams. So I would be interested in that as well. A comment on Chairman Case's reference to the constitutional provision about tax credits for taxes paid. I hardly agree with that. I did have a bill last session where that was a critical factor in actually making the tax, for lack of a better word, fairer. So I really believe priority number 6 is important. And then I would add, just in echoing what Senator Guru said, we are having an issue regarding outfitters and dude ranches. And I think it's both regulatory and statutory. And I would be very appreciative if the Revenue Committee could take a look at that in combination with ag valuation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our co-chairs, do you want to follow up to any of these responses before we go back to the special session question? Go ahead, Senator Case.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the input, and I think we could definitely under the property tax, we could fit the question of looking at the outfitters. I kind of like the way that turned out from last time, but it possibly was an oop. So I'll be happy to look at that.
Understood. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
before we move on, I have a
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
Yeah, let's do this. Let's have the co-chairs respond, and we're not going to go to a vote, and we'll address that special session question here in just a moment. Mr. Co-chair on the screen.
okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the council appreciate the discussion. I think, in reality, we're going to head into a budget session where we have the 2/3 requirement. I mean, we're not going to raise a tax. I mean, in reality, we know that, but I think the good Senate Chairman Case said, I mean, this is an education process for all of us. We got to keep learning about exemptions and maybe priority 4 and 6 can be combined, but I think we just keep this learning. I mean, we turn over 1/3 of the House usually every year, every session, every legislature. And so it just never ends, I guess. And so, I think if you approve priority 4 and 6, I don't know that they're going to happen, but we're going to learn more about it and keep moving this thing forward. So thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, before we move on to the special session question, I do have some questions on number 6 that trying to understand, I'm not opposed to looking at the corporate income tax. I just want to understand exactly the way the language is wrote in here. And part of it is, and I'll just ask the question is is it states that taxes from undertaxed entities, and I'm not so sure I understand exactly what that is. But more importantly, Mr. Chairman, when we get into the second one, it says the committee will review issues related to the imposition of income taxes, including a tax on unearned income. So a little explanation of what the committee intends to do with looking at unearned income as far as a corporate tax. Or are we looking at dividends? What is that? I don't know what the committee's trying to get at with that. So a little explanation.
Response from our chairs?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. You know, we're looking for a fishing license here. It doesn't need any explanation at all, but we have had bills introduced in this session on taxing unearned income, personal as well as corporate. A lot of people think that's a fair tax because that somehow unearned income is less worthy, perhaps. I don't know quite the answer. I'm not of that thinking, and I never supported just putting a tax on unearned income. But honestly, we're an investigatory committee. We need to look at this. We need to hear the arguments for that and not. I think it could be very discouraging to people that want to bring their wealth to Wyoming. So, and then the issue about undertaxed entities, that's thrown in there just to bring this home, that's what the Constitution of Wyoming does when they put the framework for a corporate or an income tax at all. They require full credit for the other taxes paid. Now, severance isn't in there explicitly, but I think we all agree that severance should be one of the taxes that's fully credited. So it really is getting at people that are things, entities that are undertaxed in the sense they're not carrying the burden of others. And it goes back to my oars in the water comment. That's what would happen in Wyoming if it's implemented constitutionally and we give full credit for the taxes required in the Constitution, as well as severance and possibly other taxes, then we get taxes from undertaxed entities. That's what comes out. That's worth looking at.
Thank you. All right, let's take a moment, Mr. Speaker, and talk about that in terms of special session. There would be no other opportunity until we come back in and decide how we're going to deal with that once we see that what are the rules and regs are with the federal money. Some comment or expressions or any concerns or support for dealing with some of these matters now that would lead into special session. I'd counsel with you, Mr. Speaker, first.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. So I think that as all of us know, we're expecting full guidance or more robust guidance out of the federal government by early May. At least that's the 60 days. And I think in discussions between the president and I, there may be an opportunity or a need for this council to, once we get some of that more specific guidance, reconvene and say, well, now we understand a little better. But I don't think that based on meeting dates, and I'm looking at the meeting dates just for the Revenue Committee right before us right now, they've got proposed 4 dates. 2 of them are before the special session. I think that was intentional. Some of the committees don't have dates on the calendar yet, although they have proposed dates on their topics, on their agendas or their topic list. So I do think that there are some committees who are looking very specifically toward trying to leverage some of those federal dollars. And I think that's one of the issues that the Revenue Committee is trying to accomplish with this. Other committees, certainly appropriations, et cetera. So I think that we timing of meetings matters. Further guidance from the federal government matters also. But I think we should leave every door open to ourselves, i.e. Management Council, to reconvene, let's say the middle of May, and say, now we learn more. Let's be more specific about some of these topics. But if these committees think there's something they can do in preparation for those, for that, I think we should give them a little bit of rope.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Minority floor leadership from the House and the Senate, like to weigh in? Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do think it's worthwhile for us to look at each committee having some sort of pre-special session priorities, or at least contemplating that. I don't think we have any certainty, but I'd like to hear that from each committee if they have any ideas on what they can do to prepare us for a special session to address CARES Act funding. And even though we do see through the scheduling that that's not been anticipated by all committees, I'd certainly like to hear that from each committee. And Mr. President, while I do have the floor, the other thought that I have really gets to our objective and our mission today, where as I look at the time and as I look at the depth of scrutiny that we've given the Revenue Committee, I guess I'm already a little bit concerned, having done several of these, with how many hours ahead of us we probably have. And my thought on this process has always been to give discretion and deference to the chairs to make decisions on what they want to be looking at, and really focus on whether there's additional work that we want or whether there's overlap among the committees, and try to identify that so we can get coordination done and make sure that they're able to operate within their budget. So as we contemplate kind of the broader picture of our objective today, I understand I'm not going to agree with all of these priorities. I'm not going to vote for it if it were a bill, but studying is different from bringing legislation and voting on it. I think as long as we contemplate that they're worthy topics that are worth the time of the committee, and that the chairs have agreed that this is what they want to look at, I'm generally comfortable giving that deference to the committees as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Representative Conley. All right, let's go ahead, and if there's no further comments from the committee, any public comment from those in the room? Digital public comment, those on the internet, comments? All right, Director Obrecht, we can take this as I understand it, is one lump proposal with some excluded if in the motion, if they choose to exclude them. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would just move, have somebody move the Revenue Committee bills, and then they're open for amendment, or the Revenue Committee proposed interim topics. And then somebody can move to amend them once that discussion is open.
Mr. Speaker?
So, Mr. Chairman, so just to be clear, this also has an additional meeting dates requested. So I guess I just want to be clear, if we move their request, it would include the meeting date indication too. Is that how you would see that?
Yes, committee, be conscious of that you'll include those in there.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just a question. On page 1, in that very first paragraph, it says 3 two-day meetings. I assume that that's a typo and it should say 4.
So it'll be 4. All right, committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. President, I move for adoption of the Joint Revenue Committee 2021 interim topic requests.
Second? There's a second. Open for discussion.
Go ahead.
Representative Gray.
I'd like to remove, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to remove priority number 1 and priority number 6 from the list.
Second for that?
Second.
There's a second. Discussion? No further discussion? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think both of these ideas, if we could separate the vote, have 2 votes on each one, is that possible? I think they are separate.
Okay,
Yeah, I apologize.
back up then. Would you make your motion again to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to first move removal of priority number 1.
Second. There's a second. Discussion? Okay, the vote is removing priority number 1, Medicaid expansion. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Screen none. 3. Those opposed? Well,
Just quickly, Senator Kinski left for proxy on that,
okay.
and that was a no vote, or I mean, it would be an aye vote to remove it.
For no. Okay, so that's 4 then. And those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That fails, stays on. Second, you want to go for number 6?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to remove priority number 6.
Second?
Second.
There's a second. Discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think that this is proposal I don't agree with, but I also think it's a proposal that's not going anywhere. I think the chairman even acknowledged that on the House side. And I think we should use resources efficiently on the committee. There's a lot of, so I would propose removing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd suggest we leave this in. This is down the center of the plate of the Revenue Committee's responsibilities, no question about it. And while there's no question also that many members of both chambers disagree with it, many members of both chambers support it. Sounds like exactly the kind of thing that we'd want studied. It was also the top recommendation based on my recollection of the original tax reform 2000 as the best solution for the state. So I guess you can vote it up or vote it down, but I think it's an important thing for us to take a look at.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Yeah, for removal. 2, 3, 4. 4 in favor, remove 5. Didn't see it. 5 in favor removal. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Passed. Okay. Oh, excuse me, I apologize. Motion's failed. So those 2 priorities, folks, remain on. Is there, overall, we got that overall motion now?
Mr. Chairman, another motion.
Go ahead.
I move that we give them 2 3-day meetings instead of the requested 4 2-day meetings. I just keep in mind the fact that we just went through a process in the last year of reducing almost every level of government, every agency, every program. And yet now we're going to increase the cost of running government for the state of Wyoming by just keep adding more days and more time on. And quite frankly, I think it sends the wrong message out there that the legislative branch is not immune to reductions in the cost of running government. So I'd like to keep them at their normal 3 days,
Okay,
or 3 meetings with 2 days each.
2 days, 2 different meetings, 3 days each. Is there a second? There's a second.
Mr. Chairman.
Discussion, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a restatement of the motion. I believe the motion was 3 different meetings, 2 days each, if I'm not mistaken,
Okay,
to clarify. Okay. And Mr. Chairman, on the motion, honestly, I think this says exactly the opposite of what my good colleague's suggestion suggested. I think this says that the Wyoming legislature recognizes we've got a lot of work to do and we need to work harder. The differential cost of a couple of additional days of work compared to the magnitude of what we're doing, where we're trying to figure out $1 billion shortfalls. I mean, really, we've got a lot of work ahead. And the idea that we need to soft pedal that work and not buckle down, we need revenue. If there's any committee that probably needs some extra time, it's Revenue Committee. We haven't solved this challenge. I'd encourage resistance of the motion, and heck, you know, I almost feel like they'd probably need to get together every week to solve these problems, but we're not going to ask that of them. So I appreciate the
Okay.
willingness to do a little more.
So I'm going to do something just a little different. I want to, if we were to do that 3 2-day meetings, I'm going to ask the chairs where that would affect your dates that you've already have published here.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to think about that. You approved priority number 1, and I think that sort of requires us to have the 2 days, 2 different meetings prior to the special session. You know, whether something comes out of that or what, I don't. But so that sort of takes those, not exclusively for that purpose, but it does chew up some stuff early. And so what we'd have to cut out would be probably be one of the latter meetings, but since we would have spent quite a bit of time getting ready for the special session on the Medicaid issue. We're sort of in a catch-22 here if you take away a meeting date. So
And again,
we could probably look at trying to economize with one of those meetings being a virtual meeting. I mean, we're open to that, I suppose. I'm looking to my co-chairman, but we really would like to all 4.
co-chair, weigh in, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would think probably the June meeting would probably be the one that would probably go away, I think. I mean, but I think, you know, Chairman Case and I, we just have to get together and kind of work that out, and schedule it, figure it out.
Thank you. Just felt like we needed that clarified with the chairs first. Any further discussion?
And Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just one thing I want to clarify for the record, that the state of Wyoming does not have $1 billion deficit. The budget that we passed out of here just a while back in the general fund side is a balanced budget. Where we have a deficit is on the K through 12, and it's about a $300 million structural deficit. So just wanted to make clear for the record, we don't have $1 billion deficits.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so just on the, I think what we're talking about is we're giving the committee, this motion is to give them 6 committee days, spend them how they feel they need to. They don't have, they're not married to this calendar days based on. And I also think that maybe at the end of the day, at the end of our meeting, we have a discussion about, the use of single days and virtual meetings to economize as well. We know there's a significant savings in that, especially for educational things. We're going to get to committee number 10, and they're actually planning a virtual day just for that educational purpose. So I think there's other things that maybe the committees can work with just in the context of meeting days. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Conley?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to resist the motion. 4 days makes absolute sense to me. 4 meeting days makes absolute sense to me. 8, but over 4 separate times. That I agree with the Senate Minority Leader that this is the committee that should be doing the most work right now. And even though we don't have $1 million deficit, we know that our revenue streams have changed drastically over the past decade. And moving forward, we need to have that kind of vision about how we are going to pay our bills. We're not doing a good enough job of it right now, and kicking that can down the road does not make sense to me at all. This is the committee that should be the workhorse.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
real quick. And so it's been a common process with management council over the years as a committee starts to run into issues or gets bogged down, or there's more information that arises, they always have the opportunity to come back to management council and a desk and ask for additional days, whether it be virtual or otherwise. And so I think we stick with the standard days. If this is a hardworking committee, they got a lot of experts, a lot of talented people on there. Give them the time to do their work. And if they need additional time, then I think they should come back and request it, which would be the normal standard process.
Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm going to support the motion. And it's mostly because I probably wouldn't support 4 for anybody other than JAC. And it's just the amount of bills that comes out of committees. I have a concern about the number of bills that are coming out of committees and frankly, the quality of those bills. And so I'm in favor of limiting to 3 days. And I would agree with Senator Hicks. If there is a dire need on a topic that needs to be finished, I think we have that opportunity to come back and grant that meeting for a specific topic for a specific reason. So I'm going to support the motion.
Any further discussion? Being none, we are, for clarification, this is the motion for.
Senator.
Senator Grew, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Normally, I would agree with this motion as well, but I too am against it, and only because of the kind of bifurcated nature of these 2 sessions, the work that we're asking them to do. That's the only reason. And so I'm against the motion, and if it does fail, I do take the good speakers' comments to heart too, that maybe we could come back then and maybe work virtually to do that. But that's the only reason why I'm against the motion right now, sir, is because because I do believe that given that bifurcated nature, it's necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Being none, this is the motion for 3 2-day sessions, 6 total days, and we're leaving the discretion of those dates, let them govern themselves on that, do the announcement. Got a correct summary? All right, let's proceed with the vote. All those in favor of this motion, raise your hand. Those opposed? Passed. All right. We are back on the final vote now for Revenue Committee. And entertain a motion, or we have the motion on the floor. It's been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Just one no. So I'm gonna take it a voice vote that we got it. Is that okay, Director? Okay. All right, next up. Yes, thank you. Go forth and do good work. In your case, you're back.
I didn't leave. I don't know if Representative Zawanaser is.
I think he's in the room. I saw it. There he is.
looking.
Come on up. Come on down.
There's probably not much to be said about this. This is the committee, the Select Committee on Legislative Process and Technology. It's now Facilities Technology and Process. This is the committee that actually brought us into modern age. We started out without laptops and without websites and without online presence. And we're here now. In different years, you've relied on us more than other years. And so we have kind of a standard review of our responsibilities relating to technology and to process and to the website. So
Yeah,
it's
what a year
pretty
it's been.
straightforward.
Do you want to go over those three, co-chair?
Want to?
Sure. Thank you, Management Council, for having me today as well. So general responsibilities relating to legislative technology. As you know, we've recently updated our computer system and our web page, and we are preparing for redistricting. And they have some new software out. So not that it will completely coincide, but I do think it's important to have, we have these discussions to make sure that our technology needs are being met, both for members and the public. Certainly with Zoom this past year, there'll be discussions and conversation on what the 2022 session looks like. If the recommendation from Facilities Tech Process will be to continue. I don't know if that's been a discussion for Management Council, what we're doing next term with video technology, if we're going to continue. But I know there's a lot of public comment. So one of the good historical practices of this committee has been to be kind of the sounding board for a lot of public comment, to come in and discuss what the League of Women Voters, Quality State Policy Center, other kind of transparency sunshine groups when it comes to legislative process want to see in the Wyoming legislature. So we've been listening to that and trying to filter that information up to you as a Management Council. General responsibilities related to process. We continue to have conversations when it comes to the number of sponsors on a bill or on an amendment, and what that process should look like when we review the rules handbook, right? So we have our statutes, and then we have the joint rules and the session rules, and then we have Masons, but we also kind of have the manual of legislative practice. And so we continue to review all of those processes really to see when things need to become statutory or a House standing rule, or when we may need to bump things from Masons into practice. And then website enhancements I already covered under legislative technology, but we're anticipating 2 meetings throughout the interim, usually one-day meetings historically, to just review and make sure everything in the new building. We've only been in for 2 years, but historically we did have a facilities committee and a tech process committee. They combined when we moved to Jonah. And I think we're doing pretty well at keeping them as one committee right now, but it is a broad area of responsibility when it comes to maintenance, furnishings. As you know, we just updated the furnishings in the building. So all of those issues are still swirling, and we'd like to pursue and continue to have 2 one-day meetings.
And Mr. Chairman, if I might add, key players, we work closely with the staff and with our chief clerks in both houses. Sometimes there's process issues about, just for an example, notice for conference committees. It's always something we try to figure out ways to do better. We did some special things that involved the Jonah facility because of the limitations of not having a gallery. So, we got the monitors in over there. There's always some little hitches that we've never thought about. This would be the appropriate time, if you don't mind, for me to just commend these people that we work with for an extraordinary achievement this year.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody, anywhere, any situation could have done a better job of making this legislature work with the challenges we have. This committee didn't do that, but those people that we work with did. You know, and that IT staff and our chief clerks, they rock. And
Yes, they
so
do.
we just want to continue to help them rock. Another one that's gone under the radar screen, we don't even get enough credit for it, or we don't, the staff doesn't, is the entire bill drafting thing. All reworked, all redone, all automated with the votes and putting things out electronically, all done virtually in-house, when the alternatives for that were off the chart expensive and on time, under budget kind of thing. It's just, wow. So that'll probably continue if we got rid of this committee. It's not like we meet every day, but we do try to keep our eye on it, Mr. Chairman, and bring you good data and try to bring things forward from good folks. Thank you.
Incredible
Chairman.
year. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, on your write-up here, you say 2 meetings. Are these 2 one-day meetings, and are they in person, virtual? What's your recommendation, Mr. Chairman?
I would say historically, we've had 2 one-day in-person meetings. The members of the committee, 3 of which are in this county. I can't remember. We had 1 come in virtual in our 2020 interim meeting.
Traditionally, I come down for the meeting. I think it's important as the chairman to be present. I think meetings don't work very well if everybody's present, but the chairman's virtual. I think it's a bad situation. So
So
my
2 one-day meetings, and I'm assuming in Cheyenne. Mr.
Yes.
Chairman? Correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, because it is facilities, we really do review the building and our space in the Hirschler as well, which I do think is going to be an ongoing conversation about how much space we have in the Hirschler building if we're utilizing it fully and correctly. I'm not sure we did this session.
Thank you. Further questions for the co-chairs? Oh, we have one from, let's go to Representative Summers. He's been holding his hand up, and then I'll go to you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And a question for the co-chairs, and just, I don't remember, is priority 2 always written up this way in your interim list? In other words, it's really broad. So obviously it would be interesting to know what your thoughts are. If you're looking at this, is it like wide open, we have no idea? Or actually we've narrowed it down to 2 or 3 things that we think we really should look at? Because it's really broad, and perhaps that's the way it always sits on the interim topic list. I didn't take the time to go back and look. So you could enlighten me and I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's gather up one more question for you first. Representative Gray.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one question I am probably going to direct it to Mr. Obrecht later, but Senator Case did bring up in some of the process issues with conference committees. If you could look at the posting of meeting minutes on the interim committees. I know I've heard a couple things that it's, taking a little bit of time, and I know we all have to prioritize, but maybe if we could talk about where that is on the priority list on posting of the interim committee meeting minutes, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Any further questions? We'll go back to the co-chairs now. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to the first question, it is broad because historically, we've had our chief clerks and members of the public really come in and offer their thoughts on what we could have done better. And so it has been traditionally a broad under process is what do you as members of the public, primarily it's been 3 or 4 kind of good government groups, I call them, coming in and saying, why don't you do this? Can you do this? And we've explored those options. And then internally, we've had some from the staff on why is it 15 co-sponsors or 4 on an amendment? And it comes down to staff time. That primarily has been some of the, and so we've looked, gone with the staff internally about, how much time do some of these processes take and why? Is there a legitimate legislative function or is it just a staff process reason?
Minutes.
It's a learning process with the technology on uploading everything. I don't have a great answer on the meeting minutes for Representative Gray. I don't know if my co-chair does.
I probably don't either. It's probably, and Mr. Obrecht is going to have a perspective on this, of course, but it's probably the least favorite thing that staff likes to do. I would bet, and I don't blame them. And especially now that they're so detailed, the records of the meetings, the minutes have gotten certainly better and more detailed. I've watched that in my tenure. And that's probably a good thing. But you begin to wonder if there is a video record of committees, are we going to need the minutes in the form that they are now? I'm just throwing it out there. That's a question to ask. It is a tedious thing for staff to produce them, and I'm sure you'll have a discussion with Mr. Obrecht and LSO about that. You know, I want to give, if I could have a small amount of leeway to talk about one audible that we did this year. It really didn't come out of this committee, but we changed the way the video platform worked. And this, Jamie, you could explain this better, but you recall, we now have the waiting room and the web-based system where people can be promoted kind of automatically. We didn't start out that way, and I'm doing a lousy job, but we didn't start out this year that way. That was a revision to the way we hold our Zoom meetings that was of huge consequence and beneficial to the public and beneficial to everybody. And it's provided more ability to do automatic interaction. And that's just an example of the things that evolve in the midst of our process that worked out really well. Didn't come from this committee, it wasn't our idea. We raised concerns about the old system, and Mr. Schwab and his people came up with this solution, which works much better.
Very good. An audible. I like that. It worked. Any other, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Representative Swanser was bringing up the 15 issue. And I was wondering, I've had some preliminary conversations with Management Council on some members on the virtual 15 limit. I mean, I think it's very odd and more of a legacy of when we were mailing those out. Do you view that as a function of your committee to reverse that, or more of a Management Council motion? I mean, what do you think on, I mean, to me, it's just changing a couple things in the code, and maybe I'm wrong there. We'll do more research on that, but has it been looked at? Do you think that's the role of your committee? What should be the share between these two in making this decision? Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe the role of this committee is to be generally advisory to Management Council, and historically you have had us on your November, December agenda to bring forth ideas. And so we have talked, and it is legacy type of issues when it came to co-sponsors, et cetera. And so this committee has had discussions. There's only 6 of us legislators, 3 from each house. But that's where the discussion starts, usually from outside groups to us. We discuss and then say, we should bring, a proposal or bring the issue to Management Council to see if it needs to, be changed in the rules of procedure or be considered for a joint rule. So I consider our role to be, kind of an advisory to Management Council and to the body as a whole on what the public is saying. I think you've heard from both of us personally in both bodies that we try to respect the institution and bring forth what the public thinks, and I've tried to push for as much transparency as possible, because in our role, that's what we hear. We are kind of that first line of people who have complaints or criticisms or ideas for how process could go better. They start with this committee, and then we bring it hopefully to you and the bodies in conjunction.
Thank you. Further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just want to capture something that was talked about earlier, and I'd like to include this as part of priority number 2, because I think there'd be a good recommendation as somebody that used to have to keep a lot of minutes for a board. I would really like the committee to take a hard look at and work with staff if there's some way that either we can audio or video archive the minutes and make those available versus having to have staff go back and retype out something. So I think that would be a big addition, because I do know how much time that takes. It ties up that I think there's a better way to do that with the technology today. So I'd like to include that specifically in priority number 2. But I'd like to get the chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just to think out loud, maybe we could think about what the minutes would look like, and you guys need to do that. Maybe they should sketch out the broad motions and list of players and actions, but not necessarily do the blow-by-blows, and leave the blow-by-blows for the audio or video record, which we did not have before. And really, until this year, it was just an audio record that was very fallible and very, sometimes you couldn't hear it, now it's a pretty good video record. It's an amazing thing. So we're talking with you about that. Maybe that's a possibility.
All
I
right.
bet staff would like that.
Further discussion from the committee? Go ahead.
I would just formally like to ask that you consider the 15 issue. I think it's leading to more staff time because now we have this wraparound where it's carve out where we ask for members to CC or email the staff to add on beyond the 15. And I think it's actually become more of a time issue. And I also think that deciding who's going to be the 15, I mean, there's just strategery in that. And I just think that if you could look at that, I think it's a number one captured, but appreciate it if you look at that. So thank you.
Do you need to respond to that or you just got the request? Okay. Any further from the committee? Questions from those in the room, discussion? Anyone on the internet like to appear, public comment? All right. A motion to move unanimous consent of technology. Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay. That's passed. Thank you, co-chairs. Next up, we've got transportation topics. We have Chairman Burkhardt in the room. I'm assuming Senator Landon is joining us by internet. There he is. By golly, welcome. Okay, gentlemen, we'll
Thank
turn
you.
the time over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. So I think priority one, Chairman Landon, I believe, wanted to address that one, so I'll let him.
Well, good morning, Mr. President, Chairman, members of the Management Council. Good to see everyone. I intended to be there in person this morning, but Mother Nature talked me out of it. It's still snowing pretty hard here in Casper. I calculated it, having served on your Management Council, Mr. President, and it looks like you'll be able to get out of there by 10 or 11 o'clock tonight. So I'm going to jump right into these topics that are suggested from your Transportation and Military Affairs Committee. Members, we always prioritize our military. In all my years of serving on this committee years ago, that was the case, and it is this time around. You'll notice 3 items on page 1 of our memorandum to you. The first is generally taking a look at the Oregon Trail Cemetery, one of the real jewels of our state. Committee members who have not had the opportunity to be there, I think it'll be educational. It's also this encroachment issue comes about because there's been discussions by members of the little community in the eastern part of our county, which I represent, the town of Evansville, which hosts our cemetery. There's been talk for a second egress there, and I think that'll be a valuable discussion that we can maybe accomplish a couple of things with. We're always interested in what we can do and in listening to our military folks regarding recruitment and retention of our National Guard members. And then priority 3 underneath our military affairs visits during the interim would include, this was actually a bill that was brought forward by Senator Kinski on behalf of one of his constituents. He brought it to me, and I thought that it had relevance, and I think it certainly plays into our military affairs discussions, but it's the kind of issue that may also wind up benefiting some other constituents of ours. So those are the 3 big priorities. If I take you to page 2 of the memorandum, you'll notice under priority 4 that we remind the Management Council of the many reports and updates that we get from our agencies and state and local entities. Underneath this area, you'll notice that the committee anticipates several updates from our military department. There was an issue brought forward by one legislator that we left in this memorandum for your consideration. And members of the Management Council, I would suggest that the updates on sexual harassment claims and lawsuits, the more that the chairman and I have looked at that issue, that could be pretty deep water and it could end up taking an awful lot of time. We don't know that it really rises to the level of an interim topic. So I would kind of red flag that one for the Management Council. We can certainly visit a little bit more about that. But Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I think that that gives you an idea of what we've got in mind for our military affairs. Be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. And for those speaking in the room, just we're told that it's a little hard to hear in here, so make sure you're close to your mic when you speak. Thank you, Senator Landon. Any questions? Any further questions? Discussion from the committee? Oh, there we are, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just be brief, and it's really just a comment, and I support all of your priorities, but I do hope you continue to look at tolling I-80. You know, you got out of the Senate with a bill. We kind of dropped the ball in the House, but I think it's still worthy of consideration. We have to figure out how to fund some of this. So I hope you guys will keep looking at options. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion or questions for the co-chairs?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
real quick under priority number 3, when we get down to the second bullet point, it talks about considering options for long-term funding for Wildlink. It just seems to me that the amount of money that we put in here, that we're investing a lot of money into 20 and 30-year-old technology is, and I was just wondering if there was any discussion with the chairman or the committee about actually looking at alternatives and ramping down Wildlink and seeing if there's something else out there that's more adequate for the job than continuing to make the investment into old technologies.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Landon's presentation was not the total of it. We still have at least two more priorities to go through. I think I can address Senator Hicks's question as we go through those, if you would like.
Go ahead and keep presenting as well.
Thank you.
Because we're eyeballing that to end of the day, and so we're rushing it.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
But do good work anyway. Go ahead.
So under priority 2, we have a look at all of our highways and bridges and infrastructure. I mean, that's the lifeblood of Wyoming. That's really our infrastructure with an emphasis on I-80. And to answer the good majority floor leader's comment, everything's on the table, how we handle those. We are not discounting any potential to fund those or to address those issues. It's our intention to take a good, long, hard look at all of those. Interstate 80, I believe, accounts for somewhere around 20 to 30% of the agency's budget. I've heard as much as 13% of all commerce in the United States uses Interstate 80 in Wyoming. I don't know if that's a fact or not, but that's a fairly high number. So we'll concentrate on Interstate 80 and what we can do with that. The issues of closures, maintenance, repair, all of that are on the table, including talking to the users of that highway. I know one of our parcel services have told me they travel 7.7 miles on that road alone in Wyoming a year. So that's one. We also plan to have a good, long, in-depth look at their budget. I know that appropriations does that, but I think it'd be good as an education, especially for the committee, to take a good look at the agency's budget and to look at their fees. Some of their fees have not been adjusted or even looked at in over 30 years. And I think it's really time. There was a bill this past session looking at those, and that bill did not make it due to time. So to look at those issues more in depth than maybe we have. And I'll go on to priority 3, which is there were some issues brought up about some of the hazardous materials that travel our highways and railroads and the potential to pollute aquifers that are close to the surface. So that's one. It's a new one for us, and it's going to take some looking when you consider the importance of water and our aquifers to the state. I think that's something we really do need to take a look at. Also under there, considering options for Wildlink, and to Senator Hicks's comments, yeah, we need to really look at Wildlink. We need to look at the technology. Technology is changing so fast right now. We don't want to get in a situation where we have a system that almost is archaic the day it's installed. And when you look at the counties and the municipalities that participate in that system now, we need to address those issues with them also, and the funding of that. I think that system costs somewhere between $6 and $8 million a year to operate, and I believe there's about a $1.5 million maintenance cost on that. So we need to look at those, the potential to fund it, the potential to keep that system up to date with all the other electronics we use in the state, and at least keep it on a reasonable level. We can't update it every year. We can't update our own computers every year, but to keep all that technology current. And Senator Hicks, I hope that answers your question that you had on that. If it doesn't, I'd be glad to
Appears to have
go into
answered
that.
All right. Any further questions or discussion? Any more? Oh, go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. I just wanted to jump in to help answer the question from the Vice President. There were concerns that actually came to us from our Wyoming County Commissioners, given the pressures on budgets at the local level. We thought that was another good reason to take a good look at Wildlink, because that endangers that emergency system out there if we have counties that are opting out. And so we want to do everything we can to get up to speed on that, so that we can hopefully be somewhat of the experts to come back to the session with and keep you all up to date. So.
Thank you. All right. Any more presentation?
Mr. Chairman, just the last one on the reports. With the passage of House Bill 254 on the computer system, we're requiring, that bill requires quarterly reports, and we'll be accepting those. With the first one that lays out the planning for the replacement of that computer system will occur by July 1st. So, and that'll fit in with the scheduled meetings, which the next meeting after that would be in August. So we'll start getting those reports in quarterly, which we can address during the 3 meetings we have planned.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd be glad to answer questions, although I defer most of them to Senator Landon.
All right. Senator Landon, do you need to weigh in there?
Mr. President, just a final thought on transportation issues. It's been a while since I've been on that committee. I think the chairman and I have shared notes, and we're doing everything we can to stay up to speed on a national level. You're hearing a lot about the transportation infrastructure right now from this administration. I'm not going to hold my breath. You'll remember that one of the priorities of the Trump administration was to address the infrastructure, and that administration really never got that done. And so we'll be watching that and interested in the reports that will come out of the Beltway. I don't think there's any question, members of the Management Council, that this is one of the big policy issues that we face going forward. This infrastructure issue is real. Our roads and highways out there, our interstates, they're in need of some help. And so there may be some room somewhere, whether it's Wildlink or the roads, that we may want to consider during that special session. And so I just plant that so you can be thinking about it with us, and appreciate your consideration today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Any further comment from those on the committee? All right, we'll go to those in the room. Any comment from those in the room? Any digital comment, public comment? Committee, what's your pleasure? Second? Entirety, unanimous consent? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Pass.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Real quickly, Mr. Chairman, I assume that was an approval which included our intention to maybe not delve very deeply into the one topic that I did bring up to you all. And if we have that permission from you, I think that we will probably move on past that particular issue.
Restate that quickly for the committee so we know what we're moving on
Under
with.
priority 4, we had listed a request from one of our legislators, updates on sexual harassment claims and lawsuits. That was an issue that frankly might even belong in a judiciary committee, but also could be a topic that could take quite a bit of time and dive us into some pretty deep water. So my request of you is that you just simply allow us to interpret on the reporting end what we would like to hear from the military department, and that might not be one of them.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that was a unanimous consent, so it's on the table for you. And we'll, as the speaker noted, we'll trust your good leadership, all right?
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. President. Appreciate it, Management Council.
Thank you. Okay, folks, what we'll do here is we move through mid-morning. Let's take on education, school facilities, and maybe a quick 10-minute break after that, but let's move forward. So I see that we have Chairman Scott on the line. Oh, and we have Chairman Paxton as well on the line. Gentlemen, please proceed. Which one would like to speak?
Good morning. Jerry, do you want me to start off or shall you going to start off?
Let it be fine, Charlie. You go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, let me start with just the priority list. First one we've got is early childhood literacy, and really breaks down into two areas. We do think it's one of the key things in our education system. We're showing too many kids that are not learning how to read by grade 3, and somebody who can't read by grade level by grade 3 is going to be in trouble the rest of their academic career, probably the rest of their life. It's very hard to retrieve that. There's really two components to looking at this. One of them is kindergarten readiness, and that potentially could be expensive, and it gets us outside the constitutional limits on K-12, but it still can be very important. Second, we've been working on trying to figure out why kids aren't learning how to read, and it's a matter of, I think, individuals figuring out why specific children aren't learning how to read and doing something about it. We've legislated on that before, and we clearly need to make some improvements there. The experts tell me that 0.5% of all children are not physically or mentally capable of learning how to read at grade level, and the rest of them are. And so we're leaving way too many behind, and we need to do something about that. So that's a key first priority. It's really one of the major functions of our school systems, and we simply need to improve our performance. Second item is the K-12 education, the program and school finances.
Mr. Chairman, can I interrupt for a second
Sure.
here?
Please go ahead.
I'd like to comment on the kindergarten readiness and retention portion of this thing. It's pretty expensive to have to educate kids for 14 years rather than 13. And we're kind of all over the board on our kindergarten readiness assessments that we have. So we did do some work on that by moving the start date for kindergarten back, but we're really working with an academic kindergarten now rather than what we were working on before. We're expecting these kids to learn how to read by the time their Christmas time rolls around. And it's a pretty traumatic experience for those little kids and for the parents if we have to retain those kids. Plus it's expensive for us. And so one of the things that I would really like us to take a look at is maybe providing some standards for the readiness test that we give, or maybe a standardized readiness test. So I just wanted to weigh in on that a bit.
Back to you, Chairman Scott.
Yeah, and I would very much agree with that. And I think one of the things that we might be able to do would be to get some advice that parents can understand as to what their children need to do to be ready for kindergarten. That could be something that could have quite an impact and would be pretty inexpensive to do. So I think that fits in right well with what Chairman Paxton was talking about.
Okay, continue.
Okay, next item is the K-12 program in school finance. The program itself, I'm hearing lots of complaints about our basket of goods and services, and the complaints aren't consistent. I think we need to take a good hard look at that and see what we've really done. Is it serving us well? Probably should have been a part of the recalibration, but what hasn't been in recent years. And we need to take a hard look at what we've got and how it's translating into what actually happens. So that's a major part of it. And part of what goes on there is I think a majority of the joint committee members looking at both House and Senate are new to the Education Committee with this year, and we'll need some just plain education of the committee on the subject before we can be intelligent on it. Second, the feds have somewhat preempted us temporarily with their maintenance of effort requirements on the school finance. I think there's a couple of items in which there's pretty good consensus. I would hope we would bring back, and possibly as a separate bill because it's non-controversial, translating the attachment A into regular statute. The staff urged on the recalibration committee. I don't think that's at all controversial. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that's a probable committee bill out of this, and maybe as a standalone, just to avoid any controversial aspects. Second, we do need to take advantage of what the feds do allow in terms of the maintenance of effort. We've got a pretty good text in the what was known as the Barlow Amendment that I don't think is controversial in either the House or the Senate. So that will be something we'll have to look at as to exactly how to handle that. And then responding to what the feds have really done to us, I think we were hampered at the time of session by imperfect knowledge of the consequences of the federal action. And staff was telling us, particularly with the school district maintenance of effort, maintenance and equity, that nobody knew what it meant. The underlying law, and I reviewed that, is pretty vague, and the guidance will make a big difference. So we'll have to see once we get a good knowledge of that, and it'll be some time before that is available. The feds simply have not at this point issued any guidance. So that will affect what we can do with regard to the federal funds. And I don't know whether Chairman Paxton has some further comments on that or not.
Not really. It's a very broad topic that we have, and it leaves us with quite a bit of leeway to react to all the things that are happening around us. So I don't really have any other comments.
All right.
One thing, Mr. Chairman, if I may, relates to that. I understand we've got an obligation in October to provide a recommendation on external cost adjustment. I don't think this is on the list, but the suggestion I've heard from staff, which I thought was very good, was we normally have a labor economist come talk to us, particularly on the issue of are we being competitive with teacher salaries? And the suggestion was that a short Zoom session with jointly with Appropriations Committee that has responsibility might be the sensible way to handle that one.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
on that one, Chairman Scott and Chairman Paxton, when I went back and looked at that statute, the way I read that, it says that's not required to provide an ECA on the year that a recalibration has occurred. So I'd like to have staff take a look at that and verify that. The way I read that, maybe just for clarification, is that external cost adjustment would not be required this year after just going through a recalibration. So could we get some discussion whether that's necessary or not?
Co-chairs?
I don't have strong feelings on the topic. I think the federal maintenance of effort considerations probably going to eliminate what needs to be done. Debatable whether we did a recalibration or not, considering that we couldn't get the bill passed. But I don't have strong feelings one way or the other on that subject. Jerry?
Go ahead, co-chair.
Well, I don't either, and I think we may need to have staff weigh in on exactly what our obligations are there.
Thank you. Let's continue. Senator Scott.
Okay, the next item, charter schools. The bill that passed, assuming it's going to be signed, I haven't heard whether it has been or not yet, but assuming it is, we'll have to look at that. There were extensive amendments in the House and a quick conference committee. I think that we'll probably find some technical problems that will need to be fixed. It wouldn't surprise me at all, given the process. And so that will probably produce, I would guess, a bill that was more of a technical correction effort, but that's speculation. Jerry, what do you think?
Co-chair.
I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of unknowns right now with that particular legislation. So there's some potential for work that needs to be done on that yet. So wait and see.
Continue, please.
Mr. Chairman, number 4 priority is the performance of minority and at-risk students. If Senator Ellis is in the room, she could probably explain that one a little better than I can, because it does deal with the absenteeism and truancy laws that she's been working on.
The senator is in the room. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We did pass a Senate File 68, which awaits the governor's signature, and this deals with absenteeism in public schools. Your select committee on tribal relations started looking at absenteeism and high rates on the Wind River Reservation several years ago. And we wanted to start investigating some ways we could take some really proactive and positive steps to maybe make a dent in those rates. But it became very apparent that absenteeism and some of those issues we have a lot of challenges in our statutes. And so last session in 2020, we had a more comprehensive bill. So the ask would be to pick up that work and review those statutes, but also it's not infrequent that we see articles in the newspaper talking about test scores for minority students and other at-risk students in Wyoming on the NAEP, on the YTOP scores. There was a study that came out, or some articles associated with it, also talking about how Native and minority students are disproportionately not penalized. Sorry, I haven't had enough coffee this morning, but when they face any kind of reprimands from their school districts. And so I think it's been a long time coming for us to look at a topic that looks at these particular instances and see what, if anything, we can do from a statewide level to improve those rates, improve those test scores, and just make sure we're serving our most at-risk students the most. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator. While we have her at the table, any discussion or questions for her? All right, thank you, Senator. All right, back to you, Senator Scott and Representative Paxton.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I skipped over one item on the second priority, and that's the school capital construction. the cold lease bonus money's gone away and we've got to do something else. Senate passed a constitutional amendment in the subject. We're looking to see if somebody has a better idea, but we've got to do something in that area. We simply cannot fund the current system. So that is a part of the second priority, and I shouldn't have skipped over it. The final item is in the higher education. There was I think it was a budget footnote requirement a few years ago. Senator Ruffus knows more about this than I do, on the higher education, relating to how university and some of the management works there. There's a need for a look at some of the scholarship programs. Real question as to whether we have got the adjustment right between keeping the Hathaway inflation proofed and dealing with the fact that it's paying a steadily declining portion of the tuition and fees. We're getting inflation and we need to use some of the earnings there to make the students more whole for that. Then we'll have to look at the community college funding system. If you continue the select committee, we'll have to, I presume, review their work. If not, we'll have to pay some attention to that ourselves.
Senator Office, do you want to add to that at all?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think Senator Scott covered it well. The reference to the 2020 budget, section 337, was the university governance study, which some work was done during this last interim, but it's the second year of that. And COVID obviously kind of took the wind out of a lot of that work. So the hope is to spend some time focusing on what we didn't get a chance to do last year.
Thank you, Senator. Back to you, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether Chairman Paxton wants to add anything further, but I think that basically covers it.
Chairman Paxton, you good?
The only thing I'd like to add is that, I am particularly interested in looking at the community college funding, and I would hope that select committee would continue. I think I'm really very proud of the fact that the community colleges have stepped up and done a great job of adapting to all the changing things that we've seen come down our way. And I really do believe we need to look at a more reliable source of revenue for our community colleges. So particularly interested in that and hope we'll continue the select committee on community college funding.
Chairman Scott?
Fine.
Okay, very good. What about your meeting schedule as it relates to times, places, and as it relates to a special session?
Okay, the first meeting is scheduled for just after the special session. 2-day meeting probably in Saratoga, with the second meeting in early September in Casper. Third meeting in Cheyenne. Depending on availability of accommodations and what Saratoga's like in terms of being able to accommodate the committee in July, I think there's a possibility we might have to swap the meeting places, but that's something we can deal with. But that's the general plan. That's what seems to accommodate people's schedules.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments, question? Oh,
Mr. Chairman, I would say that if the Saratoga location does not have the everything we need in the way of bandwidth and all that, we might look at going to Rollins. It looks like they're on the list of the school districts is on the list of approved people. So I think that's an option if the Saratoga location doesn't have the capability of taking care of us.
All right. I think Representative Summers is working as fast as he can to make sure those things are taken care of. Let's, Chairman or Representative Gray.
Number of questions and comments. First, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask about I guess I'll do one at a time. I mean, first on priority number 2, I was wondering if the committee could help the entire legislature on the issue of the escalators, which is a topic of some controversy, and there's always lines that are used by both sides on this. And I want us to get to a little more on the facts on the nature of these escalators. I was talking with the senator a couple weeks ago and was showing me the growth in school expenditure. And we were talking about 2017, which was the first year I was there, where we passed House Bill 236, which had, millions of dollars in reduction. And you look at it, it doesn't even go down. It's kind of like a flat increase. It's not flat, it's actually an increase because of the escalators. And so, I think it's a spreadsheet. I mean, the other side on this comes back and says, well, the main escalator is the increase in ADM, but I think we need to hone in a little more on this. And I think the committee could help maybe prepare a spreadsheet, a seminar for the entire legislature, so we all become masters at the escalators.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Charlie. Senator Scott.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, the couple of things there. It goes up and down with the ADM as it should. Whether that's an escalator or a de-escalator depends on the state of our economy. And I won't get partisan as to the possibilities facing us in the immediate future. And the federal stimulus does accommodate increases or decreases in enrollment. The biggest real escalator is the health insurance costs. We've been basing what we pay on the state employees plan, which is both very rich and frankly, in my judgment, not very well managed. And something needs to be done about that. The maintenance of effort or problems dealing with the feds probably precludes us from dealing with some of that in the school foundation formula. But increasing health insurance costs are the biggest problem that we've got in there. And that is a society-wide problem. And it's especially a problem because it's tied to our state thing, which is not well run.
All right, go ahead. Was there another question? Go ahead. I don't see any others on the screen.
The second one was on priority number 5, and I really appreciate, I'm not sure how this came out. I'm glad someone remembered about this budget line item. I was wondering where this had gone, and I do think with COVID, it kind of got, it just lost maybe a little bit. I'm not sure the timing on that amendment. I have to go back and look at the wording, but what's the direction, that you think the committee, is there any thought in the direction you're going to go? I mean, one thing about the study is there's probably only so many things you can do, right? I mean, I had a bill to create an election process for the board. I think that's the way I think it should go. I think we should have different regions of the state elect members, maybe have a few at-large members. But the legislature kind of, when there were issues, and there's always been issues, and I'm concerned about the direction of the university that kind of punted with this study, and do want to make sure we get something concrete on the table here that is good. So are you any thoughts on the direction you're going to go, or is it just pretty tenuous at this point?
Go ahead, senators.
My thought is that this is something that the first thing we need to do, just have some quiet talks with probably a subset of the committee, with the management of the university, and see what their thoughts are. Some of the complaints have to do with internal things the university getting timely decisions made on when there's changes in research grants, that make sure that the approvals for that are at the appropriate level. I'm not at this point, until we've talked quietly to the trustees and the president and some of the other interested parties, I don't think we're at the point of considering legislation. And we have to be sensitive to the constitutional requirements in terms of how the universities actually run. So at this point, there's been a couple of studies done. And again, Senator Office knows more about the specifics than I do. But it looks like that's where we're going to start with. Those preliminary things just were not able to be handled due in part to the COVID.
Chairman Paxton, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was well said.
Floor Leader Rothfuss, did you want to insert anything there?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Question on priority number 5, based on the description that Chairman Scott given, referencing the committee will also study the higher education scholarship program. When you look at that, based on the explanation you gave, is it going to require an actuary to come back in and look at that program? Is that something, how do you view looking at that without updated actuarially data to suggest what the viability or increase in inflation and cost for that scholarship program? Is this something that the committee is going to require actuarially information to make those decisions, to study that?
Co-chairs?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think so. I think that'd be a waste of money. I think we can look at do some very simple calculations. I think, frankly, the LSO fiscal staff, led by Don Richards, can give us very good advice on that. And I think that we need to just look at the balance between what's getting tipped back into the fund and what's going out for the scholarships. And because no point in inflation proofing the fund if you can't use some of that to keep up with the inflation that the students are seeing right now. And we've declined from nearly paying tuition and fees with the various levels to paying about 60%. And that says to me, we need to take advantage of the inflation proofing we've done. So I think it's some pretty simple calculations, and I don't think you need an actuary.
Further questions from the committee? We have Representative Summers and then to you, Representative Gray.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And just a comment on that last topic. I believe what it says there is the committee will also study the higher education scholarship program. So that's, you can look both at the monetary and the programmatic piece of that. And I think one thing that needs to be looked at in the Hathaway is the very bottom level of the Hathaway and how it's functioning and whether it's providing the best, I guess you'd call it, bang for our buck. So I think there's multiple things there. And, the only thing I'm going to say on number 2 and the basket of goods, and I think everybody knows this, in 2017, when we did a recalibration, we did study the basket of goods extensively. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at it again, and it never hurts to take a look at that, but that was studied extensively in 2017. Thank you.
Let me say,
Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, on the Hathaway, the requirements for the success curriculum have grown from, there were 3 or 4 sentences when we first put them in. And over time, they've grown to a page and a half, 3 pages of statute. Maybe it's time to go back to the original 3 or 4 sentences that were really what the guidance counselors have been recommending college-bound students for years, and start the process all over again. because it does seem to have grown.
Representative Gray.
Mr. Chairman. My last question is on the meeting dates. I'm very concerned about this. The first one's after the special session that was mentioned. I mean, maybe I didn't get the memo, it wouldn't surprise me, but I think it's very important here for the special session. The main thing I think would be one of the main things is how do we handle the federal funds in schools? It would be, in my opinion, offensive to have the state guarantee plus the federal funds with no legislative oversight. And I don't know if we're bringing that into appropriations or what happened here, but maybe I didn't get the memo, but I know appropriations, their first priority is use of federal funds, but I really think the whole discussion on school finance, the passage of this federal funding money bill 2 weeks before the end of the session changed the whole discussion for a variety of reasons, one of which is we haven't even received guidance on what on earth is going on. And to not have a meeting, I assume the answer is going to be that appropriation going to handle this, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with nothing before the special session. So that's my question or comment. Do you agree?
I could insert here that this is an ongoing work in progress, and we are still working on some matters that I'll talk about with the co-chair later in the meeting. But at this point, I think we can move forward unless our chairs of education would like to discuss it at all. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Co-chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to make a couple comments because I'll probably bring a motion, like some feedback from the chairman. So in priority number 2, I see nothing on virtual learning. If anything has changed in the last year, we've done a lot of, school districts have done a lot of things in the virtual world. And I'd certainly like that at least to be mentioned in number 2, as you think about K-12 programming, et cetera. So maybe virtual is not the right word anymore. Maybe it's remote, maybe it's something else. The second thing is, so that's one thing. Second thing is in the priority number 5, under the scholarship programs, it seems like we've already enacted a Wyoming Works program. There was legislation on Earn While You Learn, Wyoming's tomorrow, this session. So I guess I'll ask for the committee or the management council to suggest that some of that language be added in there. And then finally, I've been visiting with the community colleges quite a bit. And there's a request, and I think probably some of you have seen this request, that they actually have a home committee assigned. And I know there's some difference between funding and programmatic things, but I certainly think that it would be helpful to just designate a committee. And I'm going to respectfully suggest it's the education committee for programmatic type things, that be the committee for that. So those are just 3 things that I just wanted to throw out there: virtual learning in the K-12 home committee, and then the potential for the workforce programs at the community colleges. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. 3 points that you'd like to address, chairs, or how do you want to do that?
Well,
Mr. Chairman, I think the suggestions are very valid and certainly would not have a problem having those included.
Thank you. Co-chair Scott?
I would agree with that. I would say on the Wyoming Works and things like that, the problem is going to be a funding source. That was what hung it up during the session. With regard to the community colleges, that makes a good deal of sense to me. I'd assume that it was the education committee.
All right. Thank you. Any follow-up? Go ahead, Senator Rothis.
Thank you. I'll just note that I thought it was too for the last 11 years. I thought the Community College Commission reported to the JEC. They frequently do. It seemed like from a policy standpoint, we had always been the committee that was working with them. I know that they go to JAC for budget related issues, but I would have said that already had happened. So apparently I'm mistaken on that.
Mr. Co-chair, do you want to follow up?
Mr. Chairman, and I think what the good senator said was the commission. I think the commission probably does feel like they go directly to education. I'm talking about the community college districts, community colleges. And like I said, all I'm reflecting is a motion that was passed by the community college districts recently saying, we'd like to understand who our home committee is. So maybe it's just a clarification. If that's all it is, and that's fair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further comments? Go ahead from the audience. We'll count you as from the audience. We're moving to the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the question of whether the community college is housed in the education committee, I think there's been discussion over the years about the fact that when the education committee meets, primarily we talk about K through 12 education issues. And so the University of Wyoming and the community colleges are a bit of a stepchild. Like sometimes we hear reports from them, sometimes we get updates, but it's not as regular, as intense as our K through 12 work. I know I've sent a letter to the management council in prior committee or prior years asking for a restructure of our entire committee structure. Instead of having like a labor health committee, what about just having health committee, taking the labor issue out and pulling it with some business and workforce issues and having that kind of be a permanent committee for the colleges and the University of Wyoming. So when I just saw people saying, well, of course, duh, education, of course, that's the committee. I just wanted to offer that alternative perspective that I think that is one thing we hear about often is workforce needs. And we don't have a laser focused committee that just deals with workforce. It's kind of spread out among various committees. So just an alternative theory for you to consider.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that. All right. Any further from the committee? We're going to go back into the audience. Those in attendance, any comments, questions? Any public comment on the internet, digital? There being none, committee, what's your pleasure?
I move the 2021 interim topics of the Joint Education Interim Committee.
Is there a second? And
Second.
And did we get that on the record? Senator Rothfuss, your mic was on?
Oh, probably did.
Let's put
Oh,
that,
let's see if mine is on.
yeah, let's put it on the record.
I move the 2021 interim topics for consideration for the Joint Education Interim Committee.
There was a second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just one quick, and it's just a clarification, and I think it is in the priority number 5 regarding the University of Wyoming governance. But I just want to make sure where it says authorize the study. So the intent of the committee to continue to review best practices of other institutions. And I just want to make sure that those are land grant institutions. And I think that is but just to verify that we want to add that 2 words as land grant institutions to higher education. And I believe that is in the budget footnote.
Everybody comfortable with that? All right. All right. We have a motion on the table. All those in favor say aye. Oh, go ahead. Senator Rothfuss and then our co-chair.
Thanks. No, Mr. Co-Chair had an amendment. I know he wanted to, so I was just trying to slow
So,
things down.
so Mr. Chairman, so I'd like to, on priority number 2, I'd like to add in virtual learning, remote learning as one of the inclusions in that first sentence. So including Common Core knowledge, skills, and add remote and virtual learning as something that they're going to be a part of that.
Thank you.
Maybe it's implicit, but I think that I would like it there.
There's
Thank you. Mr.
probably
Chairman.
wisdom in that. We have an amendment. Is there a second? It's been seconded. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. And the amendment is passed. We are back on the full, not the full bill, but the full list of interim topics. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, to priority number 5, I'd like to add a last sentence that just designates that the Education Committee be the home committee for both all institutions of higher education, public institutions of higher education in Wyoming.
It's amended. Second for it. We have a second on that. It's been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment is passed. Any further amendments? Go ahead.
Third, Mr. Chairman, so on the higher education scholarship programs, which is in priority number 5, I'd like just to add some verbiage about including workforce, including the works program and any subsequent workforce training programs.
Thank you. Is there a second? It's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those nay. Amendments passed. Mr. Speaker. Got a full list. Pat, all right, question on the list of interim topics for education, joint education.
It was kind of okay.
I kind of did one of those. Anybody have a problem? Okay. All right. All those in favor of the 2021 interim topics for joint education, say aye. Those opposed, nay. Joint education has their list. Now we have school facilities. in kind of in some transition there. I wonder if Senator Landon might still be out there to give us an update. Or who do we have? Are you on that committee as well, Representative? You are now, you and Senator Landon can tell us about the interim topics for Select Committee on School Facilities.
I'll let the senior partner of Landon and Landon go ahead and start this off, Mr. Chairman.
That was very quick.
Well, thank you very much, and glad to represent the firm, Mr. Chairman. I mostly stuck around this morning to make sure that I was here in case there were any questions. This is a statutory committee, and we basically have statutory requirements as we seek to take care of those 25 million square feet and hundreds of buildings and all the square footage out there. It includes all the major maintenance work, the priorities given to projects that fall underneath a major maintenance level. And of course, if it's determined in the future that we want to build another school building, that's where it all starts in conjunction with our School Facilities Commission. So glad to answer any questions.
Representative, you want to follow up?
Mr. Chairman, I think the senior partner did a good job explaining what our statutory duties are. In our recent meeting, we were not able to get together and unfortunately vote in our current chairman. We just had too many conference committees going at the time. So we'll be doing that. But there was a lot of discussion. And I think one of the biggest portions of discussion that was held was also finding a suitable funding stream for these new schools that need to be built. We have a couple of communities in the state that are growing in capacity. One of them that we're sitting in right now, and we really need new schools, yet we have no money to do that. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon this committee to search for that.
More
as well.
responsibility with that committee than we realize. Very good. All right. Any discussion or questions from the committee? There being none, get a motion on school facilities, interim topics.
I move adoption of the Select Committee on School Facilities 2021
Oh,
interim topics.
okay, I apologize. Any discussion from the committee room or on the internet? Now proceed with that. I apologize.
Now I move the Select Committee on School Facilities 2021 interim topics.
Thank you, Senator. Is there a second? It's been seconded and moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Select Committee on School Facilities, you have your interim topic list. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Appreciate you joining us. Representative Summers, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, before Matt Wilmarth gets away from us, if he's could answer a question, the one thing I asked, or the one question I have on the Education Committee, one, if we are looking at the ECA, obviously we hire consultants. And I would assume that that would be a later request by the Committee of Management Council. If the committee determined it needed any consultants for any reason, whether it was to look at the basket of goods or whether it was to review the ECA, is that correct how that would go? It would be a later request for dollars?
Mr. Wilmarth, are you out there?
Mr. Chairman, he was on and then he just got off. I just sent him a message.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer that for Matt.
Okay, go ahead.
Representative Summers, you're right, that would be a request from the JAC committee to come back to Management Council if they need additional funds for those consultants, if they're not already under contract.
Thank
with
you.
With us.
Thank you.
Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question earlier was from Senator Hicks was regarding, is the ECA required during the year of recalibration? So there's two questions. Is this the year of recalibration, whether we take action or not? And two, is there a need to do the ECA during that year? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, last year was your year of recalibration and you didn't adopt you did not adopt the recalibration. So under the statutes, I believe you do need to do an ECA this year, review an ECA.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? All right, folks, let's just take a break until top of the hour. Let's go to 11 o'clock. Everybody take a quick health break. Thanks.
Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear it?
That was in there, and Bob said, let's wait until we do the special.
So in your bill and in this discussion, we keep talking about it's a Y-dot system, but when you look at the spider web, it's a state system. So
Just to let you guys know in the room, we can hear you and we're still live on YouTube.
Okay.
It's free to explain. See, I've gone wrong. The state should fix its system first. And the ETS is fix the ETS system, this system first, and that's the wrong approach.
Well, well, it's the wrong approach if it's going to be housed in YDOT.
Yes.
I mean, that is, I agree, yeah. So,
But we
okay.
needed to fix that system.
Yeah, we got. Yeah, that committee is an I-80 committee. Hope you work their butts off.
You can hear every word you're saying.
Let's bring the meeting back to order. Top of the hour. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to joint appropriations. And Senator Hicks will be carrying it. I understand Senator Kinski will be out there by telephone if needed. Other folks are tied up in.
You know, Mr. Chairman,
cases.
I think Chairman Perkins is going to be on the call.
I just got a note that he was he coming on?
Yep.
He was in a court case or something.
That trial seemed to have wrapped up before potentially it was scheduled to, so.
Oh. Well, he got a lot of experience in finding resolve in appropriations, and so he did it in the legal field too.
Yeah.
There he is.
Tied up.
You have Chairman, you have Senator Hicks right here on the floor to help you. And with that, and we have also Representative Larson, we have Chairman Perkins. With that, let's move forward, Chairman Perkins.
Thank you. And I always feel good when the vice president's got my back. So I appreciate him being there. I also, Mr. Chairman, I was in trial the last couple of days. You did wrap up this morning. So I was here and I got a text from Chairman Nicholas this morning. Unfortunately, his father may not be with us much longer. And so he's taken off to go to the hospital. So anyway, with that, I hope what we've got, I think you've got our topics list. Mr. President, or Mr. Chairman, you wish us to go through each of these topics, or have you reviewed them, or any particular directions on how you'd like to proceed?
Just jump right into it, sir.
All right, thank you. We met and did a number of our topics. We know we're going to have a very busy interim. If we have with a special session, we'll be reviewing ARP recommendations and ARP spending and making recommendations to the full legislature on those for your vote. We do have a number of topics we thought we had to take, and that's our first priority is American Rescue Plans. We've got a number of bills out there that have passed that anticipate that there'll be some allocation of some of these ARP funds to them, and so we'll be looking at those. Probably also communicating with the chairman or the co-chairs of those various standing committees that are affected by those bills for their input, but we're looking to get together, if you would, kind of a mini budget on ARP funds. And so we've got that. Also, as it says, the committee anticipates reviewing qualifying expenditures for the funds, making sure we're trying to stay within the lines that we color within the lines that the statute lays out for us. Response to healthcare emergency, assistance to business, essential workers, as well as provision of government service and investments in the different things we can invest in under the Act. We'll also be monitoring ARP funds distributed to the local governments as well as K-12 school districts and higher education institutions to try and make sure that those are being used appropriately and to the extent that they can be used in conjunction and can augment and increase the ability of these institutions to function within their budgets. Priority 2 was enterprise technology. We've been looking at that over a number of years. If you remember, members of the Management Council, there's been a number of huge, numbering in the hundreds of millions of dollars of IT funds for new IT systems among the various agencies. Trying to look at along those, trying to help ETS with that, trying to help ETS move forward in its maturity so that they can continue to develop into the kind of agency that they want to be and we all want them to be. So continue to look on that and help overview. We did have a study that we commissioned, that this body commissioned us, and we did a few years ago overlook that. And we're going to try and beginning to implement some of the recommendations from that study and review that we had with respect to IT. Priority 3 was public works contracting. In light of failure of Senate File 6, Public Works, and trying to make sure that pre-qualification of contractors, trying to protect and make sure that our resident contractors have opportunities to participate in those for that work at a fair value, and builds on top of the work of the committee in the 2019 interim. We'll also be looking at professional procurement amendments that were in House Bill 52 and some of those others, just hopefully to develop a small working group and move through with that. We'll also be looking at the mental health and substance abuse disorder. Particularly, we want to, as an extension of the work during the 2020 interim, including House Bill 38, community behavioral health populations adopted in a general session. Probably again a subcommittee and working group to with the Joint Labor and Health Service Committee continue to examine mental health and substance abuse disorder and try and identify improvements and outcomes, health outcomes to the state, and especially in light of some of the number of the significant budget reductions we recently just approved in the most recent budget, along with some of the other items you see listed there. Priority 5 was continue to look at a problem that a lot of people don't understand is that there accrued vacation and sick leave. State employees accrue so much depending on how long their years of service. They accrue so much personal leave and sick leave every year. That's not funded. And sometimes when folks have been, particularly with retirements, people worked for a substantial number of years, even decades for the state, they've accrued substantial amounts of unpaid leave or leave they haven't taken and sick leave they haven't taken. Those are liabilities that have to be paid when they terminate. Oftentimes now it's a practice to simply leave position vacant for a period of time so they can recoup enough money out of the budget to pay those. As the budgets get tighter and the personnel situations get tighter, this can be less and less an option to wait to simply hire someone to fund that. And so we want to take a look at that and make sure that we can deal with that and pay the legal obligations of the state when an employee leaves its service. Again, continue our work on the fiscal data book. This is another working group that's working to try and oversee that and maybe refine it and make it better and more functional for legislative members. Always we receive a number of reports as our statutory responsibilities and receipts of reports. Obviously we do that. We have some special spending requests. We usually want to, and think it's a good idea for not only for capital finance and investments, that select committee, but also members of appropriations to attend the treasurer's conference. And so we like to have, that's very beneficial for appropriations members to attend that. So there's some money there for mileage and per diem and registration fees. And then request up to 32 days for members to include salary per diem and mileage for members of the House and Senate to attend these joint appropriation meetings and budget hearings. Budget markup, of course, we'll start in the fall. And we'll be doing budget markup for coming biennium, as well as the special session. And so the estimated cost for that, you see that there. We've got that. So we've got our meeting schedules kind of outlined there. Chairman, we've got our budget outlined there. The other thing that Chairman Nicholas asked me to do this morning when he texted me was he also thought Fireman A, retirement plan for Fireman A is a closed plan. All current firemen are paying into in the open plan of Fireman B. Fireman A is closed. Fireman A is rapidly running out of money. I believe the state was recently sued by participants in Fireman A, and it might be a good idea for the Appropriations Committee to take a look at Fireman A and see about that as those folks retire out, as they live their lifetimes. At some point, this plan within the next 10 years has a good chance of running out of money paying those benefits, and we have to take a look at that. The cost to fix it will be less the sooner we address it than if we address it later, and also look at what legal obligations we have with respect to that plan. So those are our topics and the ideas that we had, and turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice President, would you like to add anything?
Not at this time. I do have some suggestions as we get into the budget. I don't know if or not the budget, but the recommendations here.
Okay, thank you. And Vice Chairman Larsman, there you are, buried in the middle. Go ahead.
No, Mr. Chairman, we know your time's short. If there's some questions on some of those priorities that I could answer, I'd be happy to.
Thank you for joining us. Members of the committee, you have questions for the joint appropriations? There, go ahead, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things. First, I'd really like to support adding Fire A to the list. I spent a fair amount of time working on it last year. It's a problem that won't go away. It is, and there are lawsuits out there, but we need to be discussing it at least. My question is regarding the mental health and substance abuse piece, because I know that Labor Health has also put that on as an interim topic. And I just want to make sure, I know there's been a subcommittee of both of those committees working on it, but I'm a little concerned having it as a topic for both committees. I think probably Vice Chairman Larson can address my concerns, but I wanted to bring it up.
Mr. Chairman.
Let's go back to Vice Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was exactly the intent of the priority, is to allow a couple of us to continue to work with the members of the Labor and Health Committee, because the bill that we passed, House Bill 38 for the mental health and substance abuse, is a 2-year project. We passed the prioritization. Now we need to work with the stakeholders, implement the process of getting that done. Think that could be sized down. It doesn't need to involve the Appropriations Committee as a whole, but we'll need to report back to them, and a couple of us just work with Labor and Health.
Great, thank you very much, Vice Chairman.
Okay, go ahead, Vice President.
Yeah, and along those lines, I'm just wondering if we would be better served, rather than putting this on there as a subcommittee of the JAC and a subcommittee of the Health Committee, whether we could just assign it to Health and then have the president and the speaker assign 2 more people to that subcommittee. I know there may be some other expertise out there on the Senate side, at least, that would like to participate on there that are not necessarily JAC members. I know we have one JAC member on there that I think would facilitate what Coach or Vice Chairman Larson said, was have a liaison on there.
Okay.
I'm just concerned that we're identifying this as a subcommittee of the JAC, when I think it could be better served if we moved it to Health and then just had 2 members from each body appointed, one appointed by the president and 2 by the speaker to that subcommittee.
Senator Perkins or Vice Chair Larson, do you want to address that at all, or?
I think we're flexible. I think the intent of this was just to do an extension of the subcommittee you created last year, which was field was staffed by JAC and Labor and Health, and I think having some of those people stay on that because they have the background and information. I don't think it needs to be 4 from each side. It could be a couple of us, but that was the intent, but we're flexible.
Thank you. Further questions for our appropriations leadership? Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is in relation to priority 1. And in the middle of that priority is a listing of recommendations and priorities within here. And I'm curious if the bills that are listed all had language such as subject to the availability of federal funds associated with it or not.
Go ahead, either of you.
Mr. Chairman, my recollection is that we had, in these bills as they came through, we tried to have pretty standard language in there, whether they ended up going through the House or through the Senate, so that we did that, recognizing that there were both demands on remaining COVID funds, and there were also demands on the ARP funds, or the remaining CARES Act funds and on the ARP funds. And so we have this language that said that it would be appropriated. And what we've always envisioned is at some point prior to the special session is that the General Appropriations Committee will meet, also confer with the sponsor of those bills. Many of them were committee bills, with the chairman of the committees, as we develop a recommendation to come back for the Senate, and that will basically appropriate, if not, or maybe the better term is authorize the use of those funds and appropriate them to those specific bills and the amounts that make those recommendations. Then the legislature in their respective houses will vote on those recommendations. I believe that's how we anticipate that will work.
Representative Connolly, is that covered?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reason for my question is wanting to assure that there's room in there for further discussion about how to use ARPA money that is honestly different than what has already been passed in the previous legislative session.
Vice Chairman, you want to take that, or Chairman Perkins?
Mr. Chairman, we have talked about this, and if Vice Chairman Larson wants to jump in, he certainly can. But that's exactly right. We don't know exactly how all these ARP funds are going to work and what types of requirements might be included with those. And there may be some, we won't have that guidance for a number of days. And so as we look at that, that we obviously some of this was appropriated, but not all of it's been appropriated. And as Representative Connolly just said a minute ago, there's going to be an opportunity for the legislature to appropriate, probably similar to what we did almost a year ago in that special legislation for the CARES Act money. We anticipate that there'll be similar action that happens in this special session. Of course, that'll be in large part up to you folks and leadership about how that goes, but ultimately we'll be allocating and appropriate money, not only these, but any other ideas and other bills that come forth in the special session.
Further questions for appropriations? Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up to that one in relation to other language in this priority one, I think there's a discussion about, assistance to essential workers, and just wanting to make sure that that's an expansive kind of definition rather than restrictive, so that we're talking about dislocated workers, retaining workers, things along those lines as well.
Gentlemen?
Anticipating that.
Right, exactly. I mean, as we get the guidance, we'll obviously, there'll be sideboards on this, just like there were on the CARES Act. And one of our jobs in appropriations will be trying to make sure that we're, with the assistance of, not probably with the LSO staff, but as I'm assuming also with the assistance and input of the governor and the attorney general, who will also make recommendations. We'll be trying to make sure we stay within the lines that have been drawn by the act as we go out and expand. It could be for any of these things. There may be restrictions on some, but we'll try and make those recommendations within the act.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Perkins, I guess the question I have about that particular list is, does this as structured kind of presuppose that those are higher priorities than other things might be as we learn the terms and conditions of the ARPA money? It seems that a lot of what is there is kind of based on things that would be compliant with CARES Act. And I know that a lot of them were written for CARES Act. And I guess I wouldn't want you to be limited along with the rest of appropriations to thinking inside the CARES Act box if the ARP money is more broadly useful.
Chairman Perkins?
This is just a list. We don't have the guidelines yet. And so you're exactly right. This was kind of lifted out of last year. It's meant to be just, when we say it could be these things, it will, but it's not limited to those things. So again, we think that most of, other than the acts that have officially passed, we anticipate we'll get recommendations from the governor. We'll make our recommendations, but ultimately the priorities and how they're spent will be decided by the legislature as a whole, just like any other appropriation. We'll have those debates, and I think we view it as our job to be able to make those recommendations, understand the statute and how these expenditures, regardless of whether they're on this list or items that aren't on this list, that are other items that are brought forth to us with suggestions, that we simply just have at least a base knowledge or working knowledge so that we could give some guidance to the legislature with respect to whether they're qualifying expenditures under the act. That's all it's talking about.
Good. Senator Rothfuss, go ahead.
Quick follow-up, yeah. I think the word that might be troublesome then is prioritize, because the implication with the sentence in developing these recommendations, the committee will prioritize. But you don't see that as meaning putting them as higher priorities than other programs. It sounds like, Chairman Perkins, you see that as meaning that somewhere on a list of priorities will be those bills. Is that fair?
Chairman Perkins and Vice Chair, you're also allowed, want to jump in there, Larson? Go ahead, gentlemen.
Lloyd's got his mic off. We'll let him go first.
Well, I think to Chairman Perkins' point is as those bills came through this year, they all, they had a plan and they had an appropriation. And we agreed that those were reasonable plans to consider. We didn't have guidance. We didn't know the terms and conditions of the money. So we put as funds are available with the intent that we would take all of those bills, reconsider them along with the governor's recommendations as outlined by the Treasury guidance, and in addition to any additional suggestions or ideas that come forth. And so I think that we have a pretty broad horizon there to look at, but we wanted to, I don't know if prioritization is not the right term to use on those bills, but we certainly are going to consider them because they come from committees that had put work in on them and want to make sure that they stay in the loop.
Senator Perkins, any follow-up?
No, I don't see it as any different than any other of the budget-like processes that come through appropriation. We make recommendations and suggestions. I suppose that in some respect they're prioritized because we say, hey, these are our recommendations. But ultimately, it's each house of the legislature decides what those priorities are, expends the money how they think it is, adjusts it how they want. And then we go back to conference committee and try and resolve the differences.
Senator Rothfuss, good, okay. Any other questions for our chairs for appropriations leadership?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
real quick, back on item 4. This is on the Labor and Health agenda too. So I'm just wondering, I see one of the chairmen from Labor and Health here. If it would work with the suggestion I had earlier that we just move this to Labor and Health and then allow the president and the speaker to assign 2 more people to work on that subcommittee. But I'm wondering if we could have the chairman from House Labor and Health speak to that issue.
Chairman
That would
Wilson,
work for
step
them.
right up there.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning.
Sue Wilson, Chairman House Labor Health. That's correct. We do have, not this specific, but we do have the topic of mental health, of course, on our committee request. What I would visualize, frankly, is a more slimmed down work group than what we had last time. The department has already held a meeting with a few of us who were on the subcommittee before. It's really not necessary at this point to go. I think we had 8, 4 from each body last time. Because we're going to go through the summer and the agency has got its assignment laid out in the bill to work with stakeholders. What we're visualizing really would be maybe 2 and 2 from each chamber. And for example, Senator Schuler, who was on labor last year, is not on labor now, but it was available at the meeting and is interested in following up. So my suggestion really would be to just put this under the mental health topic of the Labor Committee. And then rather than specifying the membership, just say 2 appointed by the speaker and 2 by the president, and let you folks consult with us or, at your own discretion to carry forward people who have had an interest and who have a background, who have worked on it already. We don't need to bring them up to speed. Both labor committees are fairly green. So I think that might be a good way to handle it. And we don't need as many people as we had before, Mr. Chairman.
Understood. The Vice Chair and the Chairman agreeable with all of this? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Let's plan accordingly for that. Thank you for being ready at the call. Any further questions or discussion for our appropriations? All right. Is there being any in the committee room? No, anybody? Okay, go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions, I'll fold them into one. On the ETS deal, so are you guys going to go through every single position and make sure that we're trying to centralize all these positions in other agencies in ETS? Because how many positions out there are there? I think we've talked to Director Bach about that. And also on the HR side, I mean, how many positions are out there in agencies that we could centralize in ETS? I mean, that's the whole idea behind the agency. And
it never made sense to me. We create these agencies to centralize certain functions and then we still provide positions in other agencies. So is that what you're trying to do too in priority number 2? Because I'm not sure I totally see that here. And I'd like to ask whether that's part of the intent.
Do you want separate answers? Do you want to combine them all?
Yeah, I'll do the other one too. On the fiscal data book, I mean, where are you going with that? I mean, it's kind of tenuous. I mean, I think there's been a lot of good additions to the fiscal data book, the charts, the making it clear what's going on through time. But I'm also concerned a little bit about the efforts to always truncate the data. I mean, it just having the data there is good. Maybe save on printing costs, but having it online is good. So, I mean, what's the intent there? Is it more clarity in the charts, or is it more just truncating the whole book, which I would lean towards the first, not the second. Thanks.
Two different questions, Vice Chairman Larson, Chairman Perkins.
I'll tackle the ETS question, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and maybe take a stab at the data book. But as the committee has looked at technology requests from agencies, Representative Gray is correct. There seems to be some confusion on who is providing the services within the agencies, and so to make sure that we have a firm line in the sand on what services ETS is providing, and make sure that those aren't being duplicated again back within the agency is important, and we're trying to get the bow tied on that package. And then probably more important is the process of evaluating the request for some of these systems, the technology system, like the RIS system that we talked about in YDOT, the process for evaluating and approving funds and getting these in place. We went through the Barry Dunn report, and they come back and pointed out that our ETS agency is young, which is not unusual for other states, and that we need to provide it with the means and guidance to get its legs under it. And by guidance is to define some rules and statutes and policies on how they assist the agencies in the gaps that we're seeing. And so we're just trying to clear the waters on how we do that. And on the fiscal data book, we think that we're just tying the bow on that box. I think that we're really close. As I recall, Chairman Perkins, from the discussion when we was looking at this, is we just felt like we wanted to take one more look at the data book and make sure that we had everything in there that kind of cleaned that whole process up, and wanted to get that done this year.
Chairman Perkins.
I don't really have much data about the data book because I was not involved in that last year. So what you heard from Vice Chairman Larson is, I wouldn't have anything to add to that. I see Representative Summers may have something to add, and so Representative Schwartz and Senator Grew. All of those have recently served in the last legislative term on this. So we might go to them for some of that, Mr. Chairman.
3 phone a friend opportunities. Let's start with Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Chairman Perkins, thanks for that. Yeah, we did look at it, and the whole idea was to make it more user-friendly, not only for the legislature, but for the public. And we kind of started down that process. We've got some really good help out of LSO to kind of get a good handle on where we're at. And I don't think there's big revisions from here, but there's still cleanup. And I just think one more interim, and I think we kind of get a pretty good handle on that. And I won't be doing that, but I think it's worth doing. Before everybody got the data book, looked at it, eyes crossed when they saw all the lines that crossed each other, and it was pitched. So the idea was to include the information. I agree with Representative Gray. We don't want to lose the good information that's just in bulk, but that's why that's kind of in the back pages. But certainly we have to make it more user-friendly. Thank you.
Senator Grew.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just, I think there is, in the short time we have, to try to get that book a little more worked out. And I think if you go, we worked extensively on trying to bring hyperlinks into the online copy when you look at it online, so you can go as far into the weeds as you want to go for the legislators to go back and look at 20 years worth of data, but also make it so someone who just either a new member or just someone from the public who just wants to take a cursory glance at how all our funding sources come, what the percentages are, how they arrive, and where they arrive to. It's been tightened up, and Representative Summers is absolutely right. The staff has done a great work in helping with an executive summary. If you go on there now and look at it, the executive summary kind of lays it out, I think, in a lot cleaner fashion than it used to be. And really, I think one more session with the working group, I think we're going to get it to where we want it to be. And that is a document that no one fears and that everyone can look at and use with confidence and actually use it to make them better legislators. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have much to add to the fiscal data book. I've been involved with that process from day one. Although I will add, part of it is taking advantage of technology. So yeah, there will be links in it, but also a lot of the information can be updated on almost a constant basis, because in the previous written form, by the time a year later, a lot of the data is not relevant any longer. I'd also like to comment on the ETS, just to add that this project started because in reviewing all of the various agency IT requests, there was not a consistency in how they were presented to JAC to do budget. They all come in as exception requests, but the standard for approval was unclear. And Barry Dunn has been very helpful in suggesting essentially a spreadsheet that would be used for all the agencies to work with ETS to give something that's much more comprehensible to the JAC when they're actually doing exception requests. So strong supporter of both of those.
Any other comments from the committee? Questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Please, Chairman.
Chairman, I think you've heard about it's nice to know that the online version of the fiscal data book will include all the rabbit holes that you can desire to go down. So that's a good thing.
Such an
admission. Like me, we can spend a lot of time in doing stuff like that. But back to the other question, the first question on ETS from Representative Gray. I don't know that we'll specifically be reviewing each and every position at ETS. I think that if we go back to originally when Governor Gordon did the reorganization and made ETS a number of years ago, I was actually serving on appropriations when that happened. And that was just what Representative Gray, that was the intent, was to centralize those IT services and develop that expertise so we'd have it across the entire platform of state government. In addition to that, we found that, we were all over the board on what systems we were buying and whether they were laptops or whatever, and we were paying all kinds of different prices. And so we thought by centralizing these, not only could we get better pricing on units, we could have a better standardized, we wouldn't have people having more computing power than they needed, a number of things like that. So those centralized services there was a number of benefits, plus having, a strong IT department and abilities available across the platform. In doing that, as they came forward, they had to step back from that just a bit, because some of the software programs and some of the IT and data needs from the departments were their systems were so large, some annotated, some would take so much maintenance that those folks were working full time on those systems as it was, and so in some instances, individuals went back after the department, so they would just simply work IT full time. So some of those were made conscious, but I would agree, and I can't imagine that there hasn't been mission creep within the agencies on their IT. It's always nicer if you can just call, Susie or Joe down the hall, who's your local IT person, have them call and fix it. So it certainly is worthwhile probably to go back in and check on mission creep and see if we're losing some of the benefits that we initially imagined in ETS, and also making sure that the customer satisfaction is improving as we move forward in this as well. It's not just about having them centralized, but the object was we thought we could provide better service at a lower cost. So it's always important to check in on that. I think one of the other things is to follow up on what Representative Schwartz mentioned with and Representative Larson mentioned with the Barry Dunn, was one of the things we wanted as folks came in is to prove this business case. So there's some kind of cost benefit analysis. We can look at cost to maintain, cost going forward, what we anticipate the longevity of the period of the system is, so we can evaluate whether we're getting the bang for the buck that we deserve, that the state deserves, and its taxpayers. Also to look at things and opportunities for interoperability. We found that there's been a little bit too much siloing. Sometimes we don't have the databases that have common databases. They have common data, but we have different databases. So, finding the commonalities and be able to and looking at data security, all of those things as ETS continues to mature and those issues continue to become more important for the state. Those are all part of the things that that were in there. So it's to look at ETS, try and see where they're going. They're on the right path. They're making good progress. They've got a ways to go. They recognize that. We all recognize that. And so this is intended to continue to move them in that direction, making sure we all got the same vision and same plan. We all move forward together in providing better service at an effective cost for the taxpayers and the employees of the state of Wyoming.
Okay, thank you. Senator Rothfuss, and then after that, let's move this one along.
Thank you. I appreciate looking at this. And Chairman Perkins, one other question I guess I'd ask that the Appropriations Committee look at, which is in the context of this, is I think we've struggled in recent years to get any upgrades or minor updates to software where departments no longer have any internal expertise and they effectively have to hire out, contract to get anything changed. I've heard this a few times where there have been what would seem to be trivial software changes, but it would have to go out for an RFP and the estimate comes back in a fiscal note for $1 million when it seems like it should be no big deal. So I guess I would ask to look at that aspect also. What about that potential unintended consequence where when there was internal capacity to work on platforms that the agencies operate with, they could be more dynamic, where now everything requires an RFP and $1 million to change?
Gentlemen, Senator Perkins?
I don't disagree at all. And in fact, those are ATS, the transition, it hasn't all been good. There's been some things that are not as responsive, but ultimately I think that also points out exactly what we're looking at. And the director of ETS is right in lockstep on this. It's how do we provide the better service at a reasonable cost to the customers of ETS. And that's part of what this Barry Dunn study came back and helped provide some guidance and some feedback on that. The director of ETS has been, Gordon Knopf, been very willing, very cooperative. I mean, everybody's trying to get to that point. But again, I think when you go back, that's been a frustration we've had at JAC. It was just what Senator Rothfuss said, was that every time you turn around, here comes a proposal that's $1 million, and then not only that, it's it's another $50,000 a year for maintenance. So we've got to try and continue to work and get a handle on those things.
Mr. Vice Chair, anything to add? All right, let's go to comment from those in the room. Comment from those on the internet. Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the interim topics for joint appropriations committee.
Yeah, just for the record.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, move the joint appropriations committee topic request.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Please.
I would have moved to adopt as one of the topics for the Joint Appropriations Committee to study as the fireman A.
Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, so could we make this a combination to strike number 4, mental health, and just insert fireman A as number 4?
Is that friendly?
It's taking two, taking two birds with one stone, maybe?
Friendly.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, second.
Mr. Chairman, we couldn't hear the motion on Zoom. And
Okay, let's go ahead and have the original sponsor explain what we just did, both with your motion and the the friendly amendment.
Mr. Chairman, the motion would be to
Your mic is not on, Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the motion would be to eliminate priority number 4, mental health and substance use disorder, and then insert as the new priority number 4 to evaluate the soundness of the fireman A account.
And I recall, did we have a second? Yes, we'll use yours as a second. Moved in second, and further discussion? Senator Perkins.
I just, I think it's a little bit broader than sound, just soundness. I think it's not just, we already know the answer to that. It's unsound. It just is. And it's quite a bit underwater. So I think it's not only to look at, evaluate the soundness of, but it's also I think we've got to start to explore solutions for it as well. So I just worry that might be a little too narrow.
Senator Representative Schwartz, did you want to add to that? You were with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was exactly what my comment was going to be.
Okay.
Broader than that.
Let's do this. If
Mr. Chairman.
let's have you restate it with a little deeper dive.
So the insert would be to include fireman A, to look at fireman A and evaluate whether there's some other alternatives that may be able to replace or make actuarially sound or solutions to the financial parameters that we currently face with the fireman A account.
Is the second pleased with that?
Mr. Chairman, could it be just say fix fireman A? Just a suggestion.
I think they were looking for deep words,
Fix fireman A.
but that does it too. Let's go with the original motion. I think staff, do you understand what we just did there? We're okay. Okay, good enough.
Mr. President, I would give staff a little bit of literary license to massage that.
So be it. We have a motion for an amendment. And
Mr. President,
please.
if I may, just as we do that, I'd just like to bring to your attention as I think that's great to give staff some literary license to do that. I think one of the things we just need to be cognizant of is that my understanding is from talking to the attorney who filed the suit, that there has been a suit filed about fireman A. And I just think we have to be a little bit careful about how we proceed so that we don't necessarily create a legal issue for the state of Wyoming that doesn't currently exist.
Comfortable, staff? Okay. All right. We're going to proceed. Just a word of warning. Okay, as amended, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We are back on the motion to accept these. Any other further amendments? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add as a topic, the Appropriations Committee looking at placing a cap on year-to-year growth in expenditure in the general fund via potential constitutional amendment or a statute. I've been looking at it for some time and never been able to get it in a committee. And so I'd like to talk about that. We've worked very diligently to reduce the general fund to get it streamlined. And what I'm concerned about is what happens if revenues return, then what happens is there's a huge increase and you have this up and down sort of thing. It's a huge part of the problem we have in our state finances. If we saved more when we were booming, we would be able to get through the bus for a much longer period of time. So one way to effectuate that discipline is to place a cap, either through statute or through constitutional amendment. And I think it's time we have this discussion. I think it's now to have this discussion when we've attained the reductions or are continuing that process so that we don't just have this up and down sort of game where whenever there's revenues available, rather than saving for when we have a bust, because it is a mineral dependent revenue structure, that that we don't need this up and down sort of thing, and that it's problematic on numerous levels, and we just keep it flat, adjusted for inflation, or
Let's do this, Representative Gay. State your exact motion so we're real clear. We understand the background on it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, the motion's pretty simple. It's a study on a cap on growth in expenditure, year-to-year growth in expenditure in the general fund, constitutionally or statutorily.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Dies for lack of second.
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay, seconded for discussion. Further discussion on Representative Gray's amendment. Oh, Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just I don't know, it's a point of order, just a question. That we passed a rule at the start of this session regarding management council that management council can't bring up topics on its own. It has to come from the chairs and each committee itself. That was my understanding of the rule that we made. And so I just wanted to, just kind of wanted to get some discussion on that because that's why I thought we were.
Okay, I'm understanding that, no, that's not correct, but thank you for bringing it up. All right, let's.
Good to know.
Representative Summers, and then Senator Perkins.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. On and against the motion. Having served on appropriations for the 4 years I was on there, that's really our job. It's to evaluate what may need to inflate, what may not need to inflate. And then ultimately, the body makes the decision, right? The body weighs in and it's a process. And I just don't think we need that. I mean, I think in times where we have a requirement to have a balanced budget. And so I think we do a good job of that. And I think the Appropriations Committee, as well as the body, governs that throttle. Thank you.
Chairman Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, not either for or against the motion. I would just point out that if you look down at the spending of the special funding requests, we've got the committee request up to 32 member days. That's a month of a month of work outside, in addition to the legislative session. So if you want us, if the Appropriations Committee, we all serve at the pleasure of the Management Council, but if you have this, it would be important. This would obviously be a significant topic. I think there'd be substantial public interest. You would have substantial public input. I think this would take up, I think, at least a couple, 3-4 days or more during the interim in and of itself. I think if you did that, it'd be incumbent upon Management Council to remove a number of those items, because I think that 32 days is more than enough for a lay legislature to have to work in the interim.
Thank you. Before we leave it, Senator Grew, didn't mean to step on you there. Did you want any other follow-up? Okay, thank you. All right. We do have a motion on the table. It's been moved and seconded for this amendment. Let's take it to a vote. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Amendment has failed. We are back on the interim topics for Joint Appropriations Committee. It's been moved and seconded, as I recall, and amended. All in favor, say aye. Wait a minute. I double check on the public input. Yeah, okay. Just making sure. Aye, all in favor, say aye again. Those opposed, nay. Thank you. Joint Appropriations, go forth, do good work.
Bonsai, Mr. Chairman.
Select Committee on Capital Financing Investments. Interim topics. Then go straight back to you, Senator Perkins. No? Who will take this?
Senator Nethercott's on.
There she, where?
I see her
Senator Nethercott. Are you out there?
She might have decided to leave too.
Is there someone else who could take it? We could skip and come back.
She's going to come up.
Okay.
She'll come on, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think that Chairman Nicholas was planning on doing that, but due to his circumstances, and he may be on. I see his name there.
What do you think, Chairman Nicholas? We don't want to put you in a difficult situation. Or Senator Nethercott. What we'll do is we'll come back, I guess. Joint Minerals and Business Economic Development. Chairman Jim Anderson, Chairman Mike Greer. Oh, wait, let's go back. I apologize. We have found Senator Nethercott for capital financing and investments. Senator Nethercott, are you good to go? A little sound and we'll be good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly can be good to go. Give me here just a minute. I am actually here for Judiciary Committee, but I can be prepared for capital finance here. Give me just a minute.
We'll just give you a second. If anybody that can step in on the fly, you can. So we'll just give you just a break for a moment.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to help as well. I serve on that committee.
Do you want Vice Chairman Larson, do you want to kind of step in and get things started?
So Mr. Chairman, the committee, capital finance is really going to be looking at some bills that we passed concerning the investments of the treasurer and the treasurer's office. We talked about the internal funds committee being the second priority. The first priority was Senate File 121 that required to do a study of the inviolate nature and allocation of the permanent and non-permanent state funds. And you'll recall that we passed that just recently. Then the third priority, Mr. Chairman, was the responsibility this committee has in monitoring the state's investment and capital financing policies. And one of the things they want to do is implement the changes of the Internal Funds Committee that resulted from House Bill 219 that we just passed. And then as well as implementing the reference portfolio resulting from that same House Senate File 119. I said House Bill, Senate File 119. And the risk assessment and fees for fiscal 2021, treatment of capital gains and losses under current laws, the Myers Rule, you'll recall, spending policy results for 21, and then performance compensation for the treasurer's office as we move that office away from external management to internal management, and then our public purpose investments. It looks like we have 3 meetings. The first one has already been scheduled on May 12th. I think we're waiting to see kind of how that shakes out to determine the August to September meeting, and then would recommend one in November, and then another in January or December, January, to finalize any legislation that needs to come forward for the next session.
Thank you. You've got all kinds of help now too. Let's, out of courtesy, Senator Nethercott jumped in on the fly. Let's go to her and then to Chairman Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Representative Larson did a wonderful job there, and know your time is very important today. So we'll leave it to Representative Larson, who handled it well.
Thank you. Chairman Perkins, any follow-up?
Lloyd's a good man. He did a good job.
Very good. Any questions from the committee? Go ahead.
Yeah, question, and I'm going to bring an amendment that suggests that we also provide additional.
We need you on the mic. We need you on the mic.
For the chairman, typically we allow the Capital Finance Committee to attend the Treasurers Conference. We've already proved that within the JAC's budget. I think it's just an oversight here. We want to include.
So, Mr. Chairman, if
Go
I
ahead.
could just, it's actually already in the feed bill that members of CapFin can attend it.
So it's already in the feed bill.
Right, we've already specifically appropriated that money.
It's
And
covered,
then-
Senator.
Yep.
We're good. Okay.
And so it would,
right.
JAC needed it because they're not.
Always an,
Okay.
and
Just
always
wanted
an,
to make sure that they were included. All
very
right.
good. Thank you, Senator. Always an interesting conference too. Any further questions or discussion from the committee? Representative Summers, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a question, and it's kind of on the fourth meeting. So I just want to be kind of hardcore on a fourth meeting. So is there a necessity for this committee to have a fourth meeting? Or if later on you absolutely need it, you could come back and ask?
Chairman Larson, Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer that if you would like.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think the reason that is this year's a little bit different. We had, there's a couple of, as we indicated, there's some specific legislation that was passed this session that came out that put specific requirements and anticipation and burden on CAPN that's not usually there. And so normally you wouldn't even have this fourth meeting, but because of those bills, and I think it's very likely that they'll have to be worked, they'll have to be, once they're worked, they'll have to be heard, and then they'll have to be finalized. I think that it would be important to have that fourth meeting. I can guarantee you that if we don't need it, we get our work done early, we won't have it just because we have to have it, just because it's on the schedule. But I think that it certainly is appropriate with what's specifically been directed by the legislature this year.
All right, thank you. Further comments from the committee? Let's go to those in the room. Anybody from the public in the room would like to comment? If not, let's go to the internet. No public comment. Committee? What's your pleasure? Let's have you do it on the record with your mic.
Mr. Chairman, I move the interim topics for the Select Committee on Capital Finance and Investments.
Is there a second? Seconded. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Interim topics for capital finance and investments approved. We are rounding up our next presenter, Chairman Anderson. So with that, we're going to take a lunch break while we find him. And let's, folks, do you think you can do it in 30 minutes? You want 45?
45.
Hey, Mr. President, I have a quick question for you.
Please.
I'm not management council chairman. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
So I don't have to, okay, I just want to make sure I don't miss another one. So I won't be at the management council. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. Wow, I think you were confusing me for a minute. Management audit. Yeah. Stick around just in case, but go have lunch. 45 minutes, folks. So that puts us at quarter to one. Okay.
I'm headed to Colorado, so we'll see you, Mr. President.
No vacation time. Okay, thank you.
Wave when you go by.
Stand in recess till 12:45.